I never thought I'd be the kind of person to cut ties with family. Growing up in suburban Connecticut, I was taught that family comes first, that blood is thicker than water, and that forgiveness is a virtue. My mother, Patricia, drilled these values into me from childhood, always reminding me that I was lucky to be adopted into such a loving home. She and my father, Robert, had taken me in when I was just 3 years old after my birth parents died in a car accident. I spent my entire life trying to prove I was worthy of their love, worthy of being chosen. The house on Maple Street was everything a child could want. A sprawling colonial with white shutters and a wraparound porch, it sat on 2 acres of perfectly manicured lawn that Robert tended to every Saturday morning with religious devotion. Patricia had a green thumb that extended beyond gardening to every aspect of our home life. Everything was always immaculate, from the way she arranged seasonal decorations that rotated precisely with the calendar to how she pressed our school clothes each morning until there wasn't a wrinkle to be found. The smell of her lavender fabric softener became the scent of home to me, mixed with the perpetual aroma of whatever elaborate dinner she was preparing. Robert worked as a senior partner at Blackstone, Hartwell and Associates, one of Hartford's most prestigious law firms. His BMW always gleamed in the circular driveway next to Patricia's champagne-colored Lexus, both cars detailed weekly whether they needed it or not. Success surrounded us like the perfectly trimmed hedges that bordered our property, creating a barrier between our family and the less fortunate neighborhoods beyond our zip code. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family. Patricia volunteered at my elementary school, organizing book fairs with military precision and turning simple bake sales into elaborate themed events that other mothers would whisper about in admiration and slight intimidation. She hosted dinner parties that the other wives in Forest Hills estates envied, events where crystal stemware caught the light from her prized chandelier, and conversations flowed as smoothly as the wine Robert selected from his temperature-controlled cellar. I was 5 when Marcus was born, and I remember the exact moment I understood that something fundamental had shifted in our household dynamics. I had been the center of attention for 2 whole years, the miracle child who had completed their family picture. But when Marcus arrived, screaming and red-faced, and undeniably, there's in a way I could never be, I became background scenery in my own life story. The differences started small, so subtle that a child couldn't quite articulate them, but could feel them in the marrow of her bones. When I drew pictures, Patricia would smile and say, "That's very nice, sweetheart," before placing them on the refrigerator for exactly 1 week before they mysteriously disappeared. When Marcus scribbled his first recognizable letter at age 3, that paper became a laminated treasure displayed prominently on Patricia's office desk for months. When I came home with straight A's on my report card, the response was, "We expect nothing less from you, Rebecca. You know education is important." When Marcus brought home his first B+ in 2nd grade, there was ice cream for dessert and a celebration dinner at his favorite restaurant. Patricia explained that Marcus was naturally more athletic than academic, that his strengths lay in different areas, that we shouldn't hold him to unrealistic standards. The gift-giving disparities became more pronounced as we grew older. My birthday parties were lovely but practical affairs, usually at home with homemade cake and carefully budgeted presents that emphasized educational value over fun. Marcus's birthdays were productions that rivaled small-town festivals, complete with hired entertainers, elaborate themes, and guest lists that required Patricia to rent additional tables and chairs. His presents came from expensive toy stores and featured the latest video game systems or sports equipment that cost more than I received for Christmas and birthday combined. I learned early to swallow my disappointment and express gratitude for everything I received. "Remember, Rebecca," Patricia would say during our private talks, "not every little girl is lucky enough to have a family who chose her specifically. Some children in this world have no one at all." The message was clear. I was replaceable in a way that Marcus could never be, and my position in this family was conditional on my perfect behavior and boundless appreciation. School became my sanctuary, the one place where my performance was measured against objective standards rather than biological favoritism. I threw myself into academics with the fervor of someone who understood that achievement might be my only currency for earning love. While other children played at recess, I often stayed inside to help teachers organize their classrooms or complete extra credit assignments that weren't required but made me feel valuable. Mrs. Henderson, my fourth-grade teacher, was the first adult who seemed to see something special in me beyond my usefulness. She had steel-gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and wire-rimmed glasses that made her eyes look larger and more knowing than seemed possible. During parent-teacher conferences, I would hover near the doorway, hoping to catch fragments of what she told Patricia and Robert about my progress. "Rebecca is exceptionally bright," I heard her say during one such conversation. "Her analytical thinking skills are remarkable for a child her age. Have you considered accelerated programs or enrichment opportunities? She could easily handle more challenging coursework." Patricia's response was swift and definitive. "We believe in well-rounded development. Rebecca is perfectly fine in regular classes. We don't want her to develop an inflated sense of her own abilities." But I caught Mrs. Henderson after school the next day, lingering by her desk as she graded papers. "Is it true that I could do harder work?" I asked, my 9-year-old voice barely above a whisper. She looked at me over her glasses, her expression gentle but serious. "You have a very special mind, Rebecca. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Then she did something that would change my academic trajectory forever. She gave me a stack of 5th-grade math workbooks to take home, along with a note explaining that I was completing advanced work for my own enrichment. Patricia was not pleased when she discovered the workbooks hidden under my bed. "Mrs. Henderson has overstepped her boundaries," she said coldly, confiscating the books. "You're perfectly adequate at your grade level. There's no need to show off or make other children feel bad about themselves." That night, I lay in bed listening to heated whispers from my parents' room down the hall. I could only catch fragments, but Robert's voice carried further than Patricia's controlled tones. "Pushing too hard," and "unrealistic expectations," and "knows her place," floated through the walls like puzzle pieces I couldn't quite assemble into a complete picture. The next day, Mrs. Henderson pulled me aside during lunch. "Your mother spoke with Principal Davidson," she said quietly. "I won't be able to give you additional materials anymore." "But Rebecca," she leaned closer, "that doesn't mean you should stop challenging yourself. The public library has resources, and there are programs outside of school. Don't let anyone convince you that wanting to learn more is wrong." That conversation planted a seed that would grow throughout my adolescence. I began spending afternoons at the Riverside Public Library, a beautiful brick building downtown that became my second home. Mrs. Chun, the head librarian, noticed my frequent visits and began setting aside books she thought I might enjoy. Advanced mathematics texts, science journals written for high school students, classic literature that other kids my age found boring, but that transported me to worlds where intelligence was valued and curiosity was rewarded. I developed an elaborate system for hiding my true academic abilities at home. Report cards still showed straight A's, but I learned to downplay the teacher's comments about my potential. When Patricia asked about my day, I focused on social activities and ordinary classwork rather than the advanced projects I was completing on my own time. I became an expert at code switching, presenting the version of myself that each environment seemed to want. The summer before 7th grade, Marcus broke his arm during a particularly aggressive game of backyard football with neighborhood kids. The injury required surgery and extensive physical therapy, which meant Patricia's attention was completely consumed by his care and recovery. For 6 weeks, I experienced something I had never known before: relative freedom from constant supervision and judgment. I spent that summer volunteering at the animal shelter downtown, walking dogs and helping with basic care tasks. The work was physically demanding and sometimes heartbreaking, but it gave me a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with academic performance or family approval. Sarah Martinez, the shelter director, was a woman in her 40s who had left a career in corporate law to dedicate her life to animal welfare. She became an unexpected mentor during those summer months. "You have good instincts with the animals," Sarah told me one afternoon as we watched a particularly shy rescue dog finally approach me for attention. "But more than that, you have patience and empathy. Those are qualities that can't be taught." When Patricia discovered where I'd been spending my days, she was horrified. "Animal shelters are full of diseases and unstable animals," she said, immediately scheduling an appointment with our family doctor for a full health screening. "Not to mention the type of people who work in such places. It's not an appropriate environment for a young lady." But the damage, if you could call it that, was already done. I had tasted independence and purpose, had experienced what it felt like to be valued for qualities beyond compliance and gratitude. The contrast with my home life became stark and undeniable. High school brought new challenges and new opportunities for both connection and disappointment. Riverside High was a large school that drew students from several surrounding towns, which meant I was no longer limited to the social dynamics of my immediate neighborhood. I joined the debate team, partially because I genuinely enjoyed the intellectual rigor, but also because it provided legitimate reasons to stay after school and attend weekend tournaments. My debate coach, Mr. Williams, was a young teacher fresh out of graduate school who approached competitive debate with the intensity of someone training Olympic athletes. He recognized something in me that even Mrs. Henderson might not have seen: a fierce competitive drive coupled with the analytical skills to demolish opposing arguments with surgical precision. "You have killer instincts," he told me after I won my first major tournament. "Most people are afraid to go for the throat in an argument, but you understand that debate is about complete intellectual domination. That's a rare quality, especially in someone your age." Patricia's reaction to my debate success was predictably mixed. On one hand, she couldn't complain about an activity that was clearly academic and looked good on college applications. On the other hand, she seemed disturbed by the confidence I was developing, the way I began to speak up during family dinners and express opinions that sometimes contradicted her own. "I hope all this debate isn't making you argumentative at home," she said after I questioned one of her political observations during dinner. "There's a difference between academic discussion and being disrespectful to your parents." But the real tension came when I began to excel beyond what even Patricia could dismiss. By my junior year, I was ranked among the top debaters in the state and was being recruited by prestigious universities with debate scholarships. Brown University sent a representative to one of my tournaments, and afterward, she approached me about their early admission program. "Your combination of analytical thinking and persuasive communication is exactly what we look for in our pre-law students," Dr. Amanda Foster explained. "With your academic record and debate achievements, you could be looking at a full scholarship to one of the best undergraduate programs in the country." That night, I waited until dessert to share the news with my family. Marcus was 14 then, dealing with the typical awkwardness of adolescence, but still clearly Patricia and Robert's golden child. He had just finished describing his latest basketball game, where he'd scored 8 points and apparently single-handedly led the team to victory. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Patricia beamed at Marcus. "We're so proud of your athletic achievements." "Actually," I interjected, my heart pounding with nervous excitement, "I have some news too. A recruiter from Brown University was at my tournament today. She thinks I could get a full scholarship." The silence that followed was deafening. Robert set down his coffee cup with deliberate precision, and Patricia's smile transformed into something that didn't quite reach her eyes. "That's very nice, Rebecca," Robert said finally. "But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Brown is extremely competitive, and they probably say encouraging things to many students who ultimately don't get accepted." "Also," Patricia added, her voice taking on that particular tone she used when delivering unwelcome guidance, "we should consider whether such an elite environment would really be the best fit for you. Sometimes it's better to be a big fish in a small pond than to struggle in a place where everyone else comes from more privileged backgrounds." I felt the familiar sting of having my achievements minimized, but this time something else rose up inside me. Anger. Pure, clean anger at the hypocrisy of parents who preached about the importance of education while simultaneously discouraging their daughter from pursuing the best educational opportunities available to her. Dr. Foster said my analytical thinking was exceptional. I pressed, unwilling to let this moment pass without a fight. She specifically mentioned my potential for law school. "Law school?" Patricia laughed, but there was no warmth in the sound. "Rebecca, sweetheart, you're getting carried away. Law is an extremely demanding field that requires not just intelligence, but also connections and social skills that come naturally to people from certain backgrounds. Perhaps you should consider something more practical, like teaching or social work." That night, I lay in bed replaying the conversation and feeling something crystallize inside me. For the first time in my life, I began to question not just my parents' reactions to my achievements, but their motivations. Why would loving parents discourage their daughter from pursuing excellence? Why did every success feel like a threat to them rather than a source of pride? I started paying closer attention to the subtle dynamics of our family interactions. I noticed how Patricia's compliments to me always came with qualifications or redirections, while her praise for Marcus was pure and unconditional. I observed how Robert engaged with Marcus about his interests and future plans, but seemed uncomfortable when I tried to discuss my academic goals or career ambitions. The most telling moment came during Thanksgiving dinner my senior year. My grandmother on Robert's side, Grandma Helen, was visiting for the holiday. She was a sharp-witted woman in her 80s who had worked as a nurse during World War II and seemed to see through social pretenses with laser-like clarity. During dinner, the conversation turned to college plans. Marcus was a junior then and was being recruited by several colleges for basketball, despite being a mediocre player on a mediocre team. Patricia spent 20 minutes detailing every conversation she'd had with various coaches, her pride evident in every word. "And what about Rebecca?" Grandma Helen asked when Patricia finally paused for breath. "Surely our little scholar has some exciting plans as well." I had been accepted to Brown with a full scholarship the week before, along with similar offers from 3 other prestigious universities. But I hadn't told my parents yet, partly because I was savoring the private triumph and partly because I was dreading their reaction. "Rebecca's been accepted to several good state schools," Patricia said smoothly, not technically lying, but drastically understating the reality. "We think it's important for her to stay close to home and not get in over her head academically." Grandma Helen's eyebrows shot up. "State schools? For a girl who's been on the honor roll since kindergarten? That seems like quite a waste of talent." "Mother, please," Robert interjected, his voice carrying a warning. "We know what's best for our daughter." But Grandma Helen wasn't easily deterred. She turned to me directly. "Rebecca, what do you want? Where do you see yourself next year?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. I could feel Patricia's eyes boring into me, could sense the family tension ratcheting up with each second of silence. This was the moment when I would either fall back into the familiar pattern of deference or step into the person I was becoming. "I've been accepted to Brown University with a full scholarship," I said clearly, my voice carrying across the suddenly silent dining room. "I'm planning to study political science and then go to law school." The explosion was immediate and volcanic. Patricia's face flushed red, and she began sputtering about secrets and disrespect and inappropriate conversations with college recruiters without parental supervision. Robert looked thunderous, his jaw clenched in a way that made the muscle in his cheek twitch visibly. But Grandma Helen smiled, a wide, delighted grin that transformed her entire face. "Brown University? My goodness, Rebecca, that's extraordinary. You must be exceptionally bright to earn such an opportunity." "Mother, please don't encourage this," Patricia said sharply. "Rebecca has a tendency to get carried away with unrealistic fantasies. We're trying to help her develop more reasonable expectations." "Unrealistic fantasies?" Grandma Helen's voice took on a steely quality that I had never heard before. "Patricia, dear, are you seriously suggesting that your daughter shouldn't pursue the best education available to her? What exactly are you afraid of?" The question hung in the air like smoke, and for a moment, I saw something flicker across Patricia's face that looked almost like panic. Robert reached over and placed a restraining hand on her arm, but she was already retreating into her characteristic ice-cold composure. "We're not afraid of anything, Mother," Patricia said with forced calm. "We simply believe in making practical decisions based on realistic assessments of one's abilities and circumstances." But the damage to the family facade was done. Grandma Helen spent the rest of her visit asking me detailed questions about my college plans, my debate achievements, and my future goals. She listened with genuine interest and offered encouragement that felt like water to someone dying of thirst. On the day she left, she pulled me aside for a private conversation. "Rebecca," she said, gripping my hands with her papery but surprisingly strong fingers, "I want you to promise me something. Don't let anyone, not even people who claim to love you, convince you to make yourself smaller to accommodate their fears. You have a sharp mind and a strong spirit. Use them." She pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand. When I opened it later, I found a check for $5,000 and a note. "For whatever you need to start your new life. Some investments are worth making regardless of what others think. Love, Grandma Helen." That money became my freedom fund, carefully hidden in a savings account that Patricia and Robert didn't know existed. With it, I could pay application fees, travel to interviews, and make deposits without having to negotiate every expense with parents who seemed determined to sabotage my future. The spring of my senior year was a constant battle. Patricia found increasingly creative ways to interfere with my college planning. She scheduled family obligations during important deadlines, claimed car troubles when I needed transportation to interviews, and even attempted to intercept mail from universities by volunteering to collect our mail while she was reorganizing the front hallway. I learned to be strategic and secretive in ways that felt both necessary and heartbreaking. I arranged for important mail to be sent to Sarah Martinez at the animal shelter, who had remained a mentor and ally throughout my high school years. I used the school's internet and phone services to communicate with college admissions offices. I even asked Mrs. Henderson, who had moved to the high school as a guidance counselor, to serve as my primary reference point for official communications. The most surreal moments came when my parents would interact with the outside world about my achievements. At school events or social gatherings, they would beam with pride and discuss my accomplishments with other parents, presenting themselves as devoted supporters of their brilliant daughter. But behind closed doors, every success was met with warnings about pride going before a fall, reminders about staying humble, and suggestions that I was getting too big for my britches. The dichotomy was maddening and confusing. Were they proud of me or embarrassed by me? Did they want me to succeed or fail? The mixed messages created a constant state of cognitive dissonance that left me questioning my own perceptions and motivations. Everything came to a head during senior awards night. I was receiving recognition for academic achievement, debate championship, and community service. Patricia and Robert attended, dressed impeccably and playing the role of proud parents for the audience of teachers, students, and other families. When my name was called for the Academic Excellence Award, they clapped politely. When I received the debate championship trophy, Patricia even stood up briefly. But when the principal announced that I had also been selected as the school's nominee for a prestigious national scholarship that could provide additional funding for graduate school, something shifted in their demeanor. After the ceremony, as families milled around taking pictures and celebrating, I overheard a conversation that stopped me cold. Patricia was talking to Mrs. Jameson, Marcus's English teacher, near the refreshment table. "Of course we're proud of Rebecca," Patricia was saying, her voice pitched just low enough to seem confidential but loud enough for nearby listeners to hear. "Though sometimes we worry that all this academic pressure isn't healthy for a girl her age. She's become quite intense about her achievements. We keep encouraging her to develop other interests, to focus on being well-rounded rather than obsessive about grades." The word obsessive hit me like a physical blow. Everything I had worked for, every achievement I had earned through legitimate effort and natural ability, was being reframed as psychological dysfunction. I was obsessive, not excellent. Intense, not dedicated. My parents weren't proud of my accomplishments. They were concerned about my mental health. Mrs. Jameson, to her credit, looked puzzled by Patricia's comments. "I've never seen Rebecca display any concerning behaviors," she said carefully. "She seems remarkably balanced for someone with such high achievements. Most students with her capabilities struggle much more with perfectionism and anxiety." But Patricia just smiled, that particular smile she used when she felt misunderstood. "Well, you know how these things can manifest differently at home. We just want what's best for her." That night, I made a decision that would fundamentally alter my relationship with my parents. I stopped sharing information about my future plans entirely. When Brown sent additional materials about their honors program, I read them privately and responded without mentioning anything at home. When my scholarship applications required parent signatures, I forged them rather than endure another battle about my unrealistic expectations. I felt guilty about the deception, but I also felt liberated. For the first time in my life, I was making decisions based on my own judgment rather than trying to navigate my parents' incomprehensible objections to my success. Graduation day arrived with the surreal quality of a dream sequence. I was valedictorian, which meant giving a speech to an audience that included my parents, Grandma Helen, who had driven down for the ceremony, and hundreds of classmates and their families. Standing behind the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, I felt like I was speaking from the edge of a cliff, about to leap into an entirely new existence. My speech was about transformation and possibility, about the courage required to become who you're meant to be rather than who others expect you to be. I spoke about the importance of supporting each other's dreams and celebrating each other's achievements without reservation or qualification. I never mentioned my parents directly, but anyone who knew our family dynamics could read between the lines. After the ceremony, during the obligatory family photos, Patricia pulled me aside for what she probably thought was a private conversation. "That was quite a speech," she said, her tone neutral but her eyes sharp. "I hope you weren't trying to send some sort of message." "I was trying to send several messages," I replied, meeting her gaze directly. Whether people receive them depends on whether they're ready to hear them. It was the most directly confrontational thing I had ever said to her, and I watched her process the implications. For just a moment, her composed facade slipped, and I saw something that might have been fear or uncertainty flicker across her features. "Rebecca," she said, her voice taking on the concerned parental tone she used when she wanted to sound reasonable and loving. "I hope you know that everything your father and I have done has been because we love you and want to protect you. Sometimes that means helping you understand your limitations so you don't set yourself up for disappointment." "What limitations?" I asked, genuinely curious about her answer. The question seemed to catch her off guard. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. "Well, practical limitations, financial limitations, social limitations. The world is different for people like us than it is for people from certain backgrounds." "People like us?" I pressed. "What exactly does that mean?" But before Patricia could answer, Robert appeared with Marcus and Grandma Helen, ready for more photos. The conversation ended, but the questions it raised continued to percolate in my mind throughout the summer. The summer before college was a strange interlude, filled with preparation for my departure and increasingly tense interactions with my parents. They had finally accepted that I was going to Brown, but their acceptance came with a constant stream of warnings and concerns. The dorm rooms would be too small. The other students would be from much wealthier families. The academic pressure would be overwhelming. I would be lonely and homesick and would probably want to transfer to a state school after the first semester. I developed a strategy of nodding politely while privately making my own plans. I researched everything about Brown extensively, connected with other incoming freshmen through online forums, and even reached out to alumni from our area who could provide realistic perspectives on what to expect. One of these alumni was Jennifer Walsh, a woman who had graduated from Brown 15 years earlier and was now a successful attorney in Hartford. She agreed to meet me for coffee, and that conversation became a turning point in my understanding of what my college experience could be. "Brown changed my life," Jennifer said simply. "Not just because of the education, but because it was the first place where I was surrounded by people who valued intellectual curiosity and ambitious thinking. I came from a small town where being smart as a girl was seen as intimidating or showing off. At Brown, intelligence was currency." She paused, studying my face with the sharp attention of someone accustomed to reading people's true motivations. "Can I ask you something personal? What's your family's attitude toward your academic success?" The question was so direct and perceptive that I found myself answering honestly for the first time with an adult outside of school. I told her about the constant warnings and limitations, the way my achievements were always qualified or minimized, the sense that my parents were more comfortable with the idea of me being adequate than excellent. Jennifer listened without interruption, nodding occasionally in a way that suggested my experience was not entirely unfamiliar to her. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "What you're describing is a form of psychological control," she said gently. "Whether it's conscious or unconscious, some parents feel threatened by their children's potential because it challenges their own sense of superiority or control. They love you, but they love the version of you that needs them and depends on their approval." Her words hit me like a physical shock. I had never thought of my parents' behavior as controlling, just as overprotective or concerned. But when she framed it differently, patterns that had seemed confusing suddenly made perfect sense. "The good news," Jennifer continued, "is that you're about to enter an environment where your intellectual capabilities will be appreciated and encouraged. The challenging news is that this may create even more tension with your family, especially if they're invested in keeping you in a dependent role." She gave me her business card and made me promise to call if I needed someone to talk to during my transition to college. "Sometimes the hardest part of growing into who you're meant to be is accepting that not everyone will be happy about your transformation," she said. even people who claim to love you. August arrived with the typical New England heat and humidity that made everything feel sluggish and surreal. My departure date was approaching rapidly, and the tension in our house was palpable. Patricia had thrown herself into preparation mode, buying dorm supplies and organizing my belongings with the same precision she applied to her dinner parties. But there was something manic about her efficiency that suggested anxiety rather than excitement. Robert had become increasingly distant, spending longer hours at the office and avoiding conversations about my college plans. When he did engage, it was usually to deliver warnings about fiscal responsibility or to remind me that they couldn't provide financial support beyond what they had already committed to covering. Marcus, who was entering his senior year of high school, seemed caught between loyalty to our parents and genuine excitement about my opportunities. He had grown taller over the summer and was developing the confident swagger that came with being the star player on the varsity basketball team, but he still sought my help with his homework and asked my advice about colleges for his own future. "Are you nervous?" he asked me one evening as I was packing books into a storage box. We were in my room, which was beginning to look bare and unfamiliar as I systematically removed the accumulated debris of 18 years of life. "Excited more than nervous," I answered honestly. "Why? Do you think I should be nervous?" He was quiet for a moment, picking up one of my debate trophies and turning it over in his hands. "Mom and Dad keep saying that college is going to be really hard for you, that you might not fit in with the other kids there. What do you think?" I asked, curious about his perspective. "I think you're the smartest person I know," he said simply. "If anyone can handle it, you can. But I also think—" He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "What?" "I think they're scared you're not going to come back," he said quietly. "Not just for holidays, but ever. Like you're going to become someone different and decide our family isn't good enough for you anymore." His words contained more insight than I had expected from my 17-year-old brother. The fear of abandonment that he had identified was probably at the root of many of Patricia and Robert's objections to my college plans. They weren't just worried about my success. They were worried about losing control over my narrative and my future. "Marcus," I said, sitting down on my bed and looking at him directly. "Families that truly love each other want each member to become the best version of themselves, even if that means growing and changing. Real love doesn't require people to stay small or limited." He nodded, but I could see the conflict in his expression. At 17, he was old enough to understand the complexity of family dynamics, but young enough to still need the security of believing his parents were fundamentally good and right about everything. The night before I left for Brown, Patricia knocked on my bedroom door around 10 o'clock. I was finishing the last of my packing, and my room looked like a carefully curated museum exhibit of my former life. A few cherished books remaining on the shelves, some photographs that were too sentimental to pack, but too meaningful to leave behind. The basic furniture that would stay for future use when I came home for breaks. "Can we talk?" Patricia asked, her voice softer than it had been in weeks. She came in and sat on my desk chair while I continued folding clothes. For several minutes, we existed in companionable silence that felt almost like old times, before my achievements had become a source of family tension. "I want you to know," Patricia began carefully, "that your father and I are proud of you. We may not always express it in the way you want to hear, but we are proud." I looked up from my packing, trying to read her expression in the dim lamplight. She looked tired and older than her 48 years, with lines around her eyes that I hadn't noticed before. "I know you think we've been discouraging about your college plans," she continued, "but we've just been trying to prepare you for the reality that the world can be cruel to people who don't have certain advantages. We don't want you to be hurt or disappointed. What advantages do you think I'm missing?" I asked, echoing my earlier question from graduation day. Patricia was quiet for a long moment, and when she answered, her voice was so low I had to strain to hear it. "Social advantages. Economic advantages. The kind of confidence that comes from growing up in families where success is expected rather than hoped for." It was the most honest answer she had ever given me about her concerns, and it revealed something I hadn't fully understood before. Patricia didn't doubt my intellectual capabilities. She doubted my social worthiness. In her mind, intelligence wasn't enough to guarantee success in elite environments. You also needed the right background, the right connections, the right unconscious knowledge about how to navigate upper-class social dynamics. "But that's exactly why going to Brown is important," I said gently. I can't learn those things by staying in the same environment forever. At some point, you have to trust that the person you raised is strong enough to handle new challenges. Patricia nodded, but I could see tears gathering in her eyes. I'm terrified that you're going to discover we weren't enough for you, she whispered. That our love wasn't enough, that our family wasn't enough, that the life we built here wasn't enough. In that moment, I saw my mother more clearly than I ever had before. Beneath the control and criticism and constant limitations was a woman who was genuinely afraid of losing her daughter's love and respect. Her attempts to keep me small weren't just about control, they were about security. If I never grew beyond the boundaries of her understanding, she would never have to worry about becoming irrelevant in my life. Mom, I said, using the name I hadn't called her in months. You and Dad taught me to think critically, to work hard, and to value education. I'm doing exactly what you raised me to do. The fact that I'm doing it at a higher level than you expected doesn't mean I'm rejecting what you gave me. It means I'm building on it. She cried then, really cried, in a way I hadn't seen since Marcus had broken his arm years earlier. I sat beside her on my bed and let her lean against my shoulder while she sobbed about time passing too quickly and children growing up too fast, and the inevitable loneliness of parents whose job is to raise people who will eventually leave them. When she finally composed herself, she looked at me with red eyes and a watery smile. Promise me you'll call every week, she said. And promise me you'll come home if things get too difficult or if you change your mind about any of this. I promised, though we both knew that the second promise was one I had no intention of keeping. If things got difficult at Brown, I would find ways to handle them that didn't involve retreating to the safety of my childhood bedroom. But I could give her the reassurance she needed to let me go, even if we both suspected that the daughter who returned for Thanksgiving would be fundamentally different from the one who was leaving the next morning. Robert drove me to Providence in the BMW, with Patricia riding in the passenger seat and both of us sitting in the back with my belongings packed around us like protective barriers. The 2-hour drive was mostly quiet, with occasional comments about traffic or weather that felt like placeholder conversations for the deeper discussions we weren't ready to have. Brown's campus was everything I had hoped it would be and more. Historic brick buildings covered in ivy, students carrying books and coffee cups, and conversations about ideas I had never heard discussed outside of my private reading. Parents and freshmen were everywhere, hauling suitcases and mini refrigerators up narrow staircases, saying tearful goodbyes in dormitory hallways, beginning the ancient ritual of academic separation that has played out on college campuses for generations. My roommate was a girl named Amanda Chun from San Francisco, whose parents were both doctors and who spoke 3 languages fluently. She was unpacking what appeared to be an entire electronics store's worth of equipment while chatting casually about her summer internship at a biotechnology company and her plans to double major in biochemistry and international relations. Patricia and Robert helped me move my belongings into my half of the small double room, and I watched them take in the obvious differences between Amanda's expensive gear and my more modest collection of necessities. Amanda's parents were warm and welcoming, asking detailed questions about my interests and background with the kind of genuine curiosity that I had rarely experienced from adults. Rebecca's valedictorian of her high school class, Patricia told Dr. Chun during one of these conversations, her voice carrying the pride she seemed able to express more easily to strangers than to me directly. That's wonderful, Dr. Chun replied. Amanda's very excited to be living with someone so academically accomplished. She was worried about getting a roommate who wasn't serious about their studies. I watched Patricia absorb this information, seeing her realize that my achievements were not just tolerated but actively valued in this environment. The other parents we encountered throughout the day expressed similar sentiments, treating academic excellence as the baseline expectation rather than something to be managed or contained. When it came time for Patricia and Robert to leave, the goodbye was awkward and emotionally charged in ways that none of us quite knew how to navigate. Patricia hugged me tightly and whispered reminders about calling home and eating properly and not staying up too late studying. Robert shook my hand with unusual formality, then seemed to think better of it, and pulled me into a brief, stiff hug. "Make us proud," he said quietly, though I noticed he didn't say "make yourself proud" or "enjoy this amazing opportunity." After they drove away, I stood in the parking lot feeling simultaneously liberated and terrified. For the first time in my life, I was completely autonomous, surrounded by people who knew nothing about my family dynamics or my history of being the grateful adopted daughter. I could be anyone I wanted to be, define myself in any way that felt authentic. Amanda found me still standing there 20 minutes later, looking overwhelmed by the possibilities stretching out before me. "First time away from home?" she asked kindly. "First time anywhere, really," I admitted. She linked her arm through mine with the easy confidence of someone who had grown up expecting the world to welcome her. "Come on," she said. "Let's go explore our new kingdom." The first semester at Brown was like drinking from a fire hose of intellectual stimulation and social complexity. My classes were challenging in ways that made high school seem like elementary school, but they were also invigorating in ways I had never experienced. For the first time in my academic career, I was surrounded by peers who were as capable and driven as I was, which meant that discussions reached levels of sophistication and nuance that left me energized rather than frustrated. My political science professor, Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, was a woman in her 50s who had worked in the State Department before transitioning to academia. She had a reputation for being demanding and brilliant, and her seminars were legendary for reducing unprepared students to tears. But she also had a gift for recognizing potential and nurturing it in ways that transformed good students into exceptional ones. After my first major paper came back with an A+ and 3 pages of detailed feedback, Dr. Hartwell asked me to stay after class. "Your analysis of constitutional interpretation was remarkably sophisticated," she said, settling behind her desk with the kind of focused attention that made students feel like the most important person in the world. "Have you considered graduate school in political science or law?" The question was so different from the conversations I'd had with my parents about my future that it took me a moment to process it. Here was a respected professor asking not whether I was capable of advanced study, but which type of advanced study interested me most. "I've thought about law school," I said carefully, still conditioned to downplay my ambitions until I was sure they would be received positively. "You should think seriously about it," Dr. Hartwell said. "You have the analytical mind and argumentative skills that make for excellent legal reasoning. More importantly, you seem to have genuine intellectual curiosity about how institutions work and how they can be improved. That combination is rarer than you might think." She recommended me for the undergraduate research program and suggested I consider applying for prestigious internships the following summer. These opportunities were ones I had never even known existed, available to students who were performing at the highest levels and showed promise for future leadership. I called home every Sunday as I had promised Patricia, but these conversations became increasingly difficult as the gap between my daily reality and my family's understanding of that reality continued to widen. Patricia wanted details about my social life and whether I was making friends, but she seemed uncomfortable when I described study groups that lasted until midnight or weekend trips to museums in Boston with classmates who were as excited about art history as they were about biochemistry. "You're not studying too much, are you?" became her standard question. It's important to have balance. But I wasn't studying too much. I was finally studying at the level that matched my capabilities and interests. The difference was profound and difficult to explain to someone who had spent years encouraging me to aim lower rather than higher. Robert's questions focused primarily on practical concerns about money and my course load, and whether I was maintaining the GPA necessary to keep my scholarship. These conversations felt transactional rather than relational, as if he was checking boxes on a parental responsibility list rather than engaging with my actual experience. The most telling moment came during my October call home. I had just found out that I had been selected for Dr. Hartwell's Advanced Constitutional Law Seminar, which was normally restricted to juniors and seniors, but was being opened to a few exceptional sophomores. I was excited to share this news, thinking my parents would appreciate the academic recognition. "That sounds like it might be too much pressure for your first year," Patricia said immediately. "Are you sure you want to take on additional stress?" "It's not additional stress," I tried to explain. "It's an incredible opportunity to study with one of the leading constitutional scholars in the country. She specifically invited me to apply." "Well, just remember that your first priority should be maintaining your grades in your regular courses," Robert added. "Don't bite off more than you can chew." The conversation continued in this vein for another 10 minutes, with every detail I shared about my academic successes being reframed as potential problems or sources of concern. By the time I hung up the phone, I felt deflated and confused, as if I had been speaking a foreign language that my parents couldn't understand. Amanda, who had been studying at her desk during my call, looked up with concern. "Everything okay at home?" I found myself telling her about the conversation, about my parents' consistent pattern of discouraging my academic ambitions, about the sense that they were more comfortable with the idea of me being adequate than excellent. Amanda listened with the kind of attention that made me realize how rarely I had been truly heard by anyone in my family. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment before responding. "That's really messed up," she said finally. "I mean, I know every family is different, but most parents would be over the moon if their kid was being personally recruited by professors and getting opportunities like this." Her reaction was so different from what I had come to expect that it highlighted just how abnormal my family dynamics really were. In Amanda's world, academic achievement was celebrated unconditionally. Her parents called every few days to hear about her classes and research projects, and their questions were driven by genuine curiosity and pride rather than concern and limitation. I began to pay closer attention to how my classmates talked about their families, and what I discovered was simultaneously enlightening and heartbreaking. Most of my peers came from families that had high expectations for their children's achievements, but these expectations were coupled with support and encouragement rather than warnings and limitations. My friend Sarah, who was pre-med, described how her parents had converted their garage into a study space when she was in high school, complete with proper lighting and a whiteboard for working through complex problems. My classmate David talked about how his father, who was a plumber, had worked extra jobs to pay for SAT prep courses and college visits because he wanted his son to have opportunities he had never had. These stories revealed a fundamental difference in family philosophy that I was only beginning to understand. Loving parents in healthy families sacrificed for their children's success and took pride in their achievements. They might worry about the challenges their children would face, but they didn't try to prevent them from pursuing those challenges. Thanksgiving break was my first trip home since starting college, and I approached it with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. I was eager to share my experiences with my family, but I was also aware that I had changed in ways that might not be immediately comfortable for them. The house on Maple Street looked exactly the same, but I felt like I was viewing it through new eyes. The perfection that had once impressed me now felt slightly sterile, and the careful organization seemed less like admirable efficiency and more like controlling attention to detail. Patricia had prepared an elaborate welcome home dinner, complete with all my supposed favorite foods, but even her efforts felt performative rather than genuinely welcoming. Marcus was excited to see me and full of questions about college life, but I noticed that Patricia and Robert seemed to be monitoring our conversations, ready to redirect if I started sharing anything they deemed inappropriate or concerning. The first major conflict came when Marcus asked about my classes, and I began describing Dr. Hartwell's constitutional law seminar. I was explaining some of the fascinating cases we had been analyzing when Patricia interrupted. "Rebecca, I don't think Marcus needs to hear about all these complicated legal theories," she said with a strained smile. "Why don't you tell us about the social aspects of college? Have you joined any clubs or made friends?" The dismissal stung, partly because it diminished something I was passionate about and partly because it suggested that my intellectual interests were somehow inappropriate for family conversation. But what bothered me most was the implication that my academic achievements were less important than my social integration. "Actually, I find the legal stuff really interesting," Marcus said, unwittingly challenging Patricia's assumption about what he wanted to hear. "Tell me more about the Supreme Court cases." I looked at Patricia, who was clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation, then decided to honor Marcus's genuine curiosity. I spent the next 20 minutes explaining constitutional interpretation and how different justices approach questions of original intent versus evolving interpretation. Marcus asked thoughtful questions and seemed genuinely engaged with the material. But I could see Patricia becoming increasingly agitated as the conversation continued. Finally, she stood up abruptly and began clearing dishes, even though we weren't finished eating. "Well, this is all very impressive," she said with forced brightness. "But let's remember that not everyone needs to become a lawyer or professor. There are many ways to contribute to society." The comment was clearly directed at Marcus, warning him not to be too influenced by my academic interests or ambitions. But it also revealed something about Patricia's perception of my chosen path. She didn't see law school or academic achievement as inherently valuable. She saw them as pretentious choices that were somehow disconnected from real-world contribution. That night, Marcus came to my room to continue our conversation away from parental supervision. We talked until almost 2 in the morning about college, career plans, and the increasing sense we both had that our parents' worldview was more limited than we had previously understood. They act like wanting to be successful is somehow selfish, Marcus said, lying on my floor and staring at the ceiling. But isn't it more selfish to deliberately limit yourself when you have the ability to do more? His question revealed a level of insight that surprised me. At 17, Marcus was beginning to see the same patterns I had been struggling with for years, and he was reaching similar conclusions about the dysfunction inherent in our family's approach to achievement and ambition. I think they're scared, I said finally. Scared that if we become too successful or too educated, we'll decide we're better than them or that we don't need them anymore. But that's stupid, Marcus said with the directness of adolescence. Just because someone goes to college or becomes successful doesn't mean they stop loving their family. Look at Amanda's parents, or Sarah's, or any of the other families you've told me about. They're proud of their kids' achievements. He was right, of course, but his observations only highlighted how different our family dynamics were from healthy norms. Over the course of that weekend, I began to see Patricia and Robert's behavior not as loving protection, but as a form of emotional manipulation designed to keep their children dependent on their approval and limited by their fears. The breaking point came on Sunday morning before I was supposed to return to Providence. I was packing my laundry and some additional books when Patricia knocked on my door, her expression serious and determined. "Rebecca, we need to talk," she said, closing the door behind her and sitting on my bed with the deliberate posture of someone preparing for a difficult conversation. "Your father and I have been discussing your college experience," she began, "and we're concerned that you're becoming too focused on academic achievement at the expense of other important aspects of personal development." I looked up from my packing, sensing that this conversation was going to be more significant than her usual warnings about balance and social life. "We think it might be wise for you to consider transferring to a state school closer to home," Patricia continued, her voice taking on the reasonable tone she used when delivering ultimatums disguised as suggestions. "The University of Connecticut has an excellent political science program, and you could live at home to save money while still getting a quality education." The suggestion was so fundamentally at odds with my actual experience at Brown that I initially thought she must be joking. But her expression was completely serious, and I realized she was genuinely proposing that I abandon the best educational opportunity one had ever received in favor of returning to their direct supervision. "Why would I transfer from Brown?" I asked, genuinely confused about her reasoning. "Because we're worried about the person you're becoming," Patricia said, her mask of reasonableness beginning to slip. "You're developing an arrogance and sense of superiority that we find concerning. This obsession with prestigious institutions and advanced courses is changing you in ways that aren't healthy." The word obsession hit me like a physical blow, just as it had during senior awards night. Once again, my dedication to academic excellence was being pathologized as a psychological problem rather than celebrated as a positive trait. "I'm not obsessed," I said carefully, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'm engaged with my education in ways that are appropriate for the level of institution I'm attending. My professors are pleased with my work, I'm maintaining excellent grades, and I'm developing intellectually in exactly the ways college is supposed to facilitate." "But at what cost?" Patricia asked, leaning forward with the expression of concerned sincerity she had perfected over years of manipulative conversations. "You barely call home, you don't seem interested in your family anymore, and when you do visit, all you want to talk about are these esoteric academic topics that have no relevance to normal life." I realized then that Patricia's definition of healthy family relationships required me to remain intellectually and emotionally stunted at a level she could understand and control. My growth as a person was threatening to her sense of maternal authority, and rather than celebrating my development, she was trying to sabotage it. "Mom," I said, using the name deliberately because I wanted her to understand that I was speaking as her daughter rather than as an opponent. "I call every week like I promised. I love you and Dad and Marcus, but I can't pretend to be less intelligent or less ambitious than I am just to make you more comfortable." Patricia's face flushed red, and for a moment her composed facade completely dropped. "Don't you dare lecture me about comfort," she snapped. "Everything your father and I have done has been about providing you with opportunities and security. We adopted you when you had nothing and no one. We've sacrificed financially and personally to give you the best possible foundation. And this is how you repay us? By acting like we're somehow inadequate or limiting." The conversation had escalated into territory we had never explored before, with accusations and resentments that had been simmering beneath the surface finally breaking into open conflict. But what struck me most was Patricia's framing of my adoption as a debt that required perpetual gratitude and deference. "I am grateful for everything you've given me," I said as calmly as I could manage. "But gratitude doesn't mean I have to limit my own potential to make you feel needed. It doesn't mean I have to choose mediocrity to prove my loyalty." Patricia stood up abruptly, her face now completely flushed with anger. "Mediocrity," she repeated, her voice rising to a pitch I had never heard before. "Is that what you think we've given you? Is that what you think our lives represent?" I realized too late that my words had struck at the heart of her deepest insecurities. Patricia had built her identity around being the perfect mother and homemaker, the woman who created beautiful environments and raised successful children. But my pursuit of excellence beyond her understanding threatened that identity by suggesting that her standards and achievements weren't sufficient. "That's not what I meant," I said, trying to defuse the situation before it escalated further. But Patricia was beyond reasoning at that point. "No, I think it's exactly what you meant," she said, her voice cold and precise. "You've decided that your fancy college and your impressive professors make you better than your family. You've decided that the life we built here isn't sophisticated enough for the person you're becoming." She walked to my door, then turned back with an expression of hurt and determination that I had never seen before. "If you want to choose Brown over your family, if you want to choose academic prestige over loyalty and gratitude, then that's your decision. But don't expect us to keep supporting choices that are designed to make us feel small and inadequate." She left my room, closing the door with controlled violence that somehow felt worse than slamming it would have. I sat on my bed in the aftermath of the conversation, trying to process what had just happened and what it meant for my relationship with my family going forward. The ultimatum Patricia had delivered was clear, even if it hadn't been explicitly stated: conform to their limitations or face the withdrawal of their love and support. Choose the daughter they were comfortable with or lose the family entirely. But as I sat there reviewing the conversation, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't devastated by the choice they were forcing me to make. Instead, I felt a strange sense of clarity and relief. For the first time in my life, the dysfunction in my family relationships was completely visible and undeniable. I could no longer pretend that their limitations were about love or protection. They were about control. I finished packing in silence, then went downstairs to say goodbye. Robert was reading the newspaper in his study, and he looked up when I appeared in the doorway. "Your mother told me about your conversation," he said without preamble. "I hope you'll think seriously about her suggestions regarding transfer schools." "I'm not transferring," I said quietly but firmly. Robert folded his newspaper with deliberate precision, then looked at me with the cold assessment I had seen him use with opposing counsel in court. "Rebecca, you're 18 years old. You think you understand the world, but you have no idea how difficult life can be for people who overestimate their own abilities and underestimate the importance of family connections." "What are you saying exactly?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "I'm saying that independence is a luxury that requires financial resources you don't currently have," Robert replied. "Your scholarship covers tuition and housing, but it doesn't cover everything. If you choose to prioritize your academic ambitions over your family relationships, you'll need to find ways to support those choices without our help." The threat was delivered with the same clinical precision Robert brought to legal negotiations, but the message was clear: choose compliance or face financial abandonment. I thought about Grandma Helen's $5,000, carefully saved and growing in my private account. I thought about the work-study opportunities available at Brown, the research assistantships that provided additional income, the summer internships that Jennifer Walsh had told me about. I thought about the life I was building based on my own abilities and efforts rather than on my family's conditional approval. "I understand," I said simply. Robert seemed surprised by my lack of argument or pleading. Do you? Do you really understand what you're choosing?" I'm choosing to become the person I'm capable of being rather than the person you're comfortable with me being, I said. If that's a choice you can't accept, then yes, I understand the consequences. I hugged Marcus goodbye, promising to call him directly rather than going through our parents, then loaded my car with my belongings. As I drove away from the house on Maple Street, I felt like I was leaving more than just my childhood home. I was leaving the version of myself that had spent 18 years trying to earn love through compliance and gratitude. The spring semester of my freshman year was transformative in ways that went far beyond academics. Without the constant stress of managing my parents' reactions to my achievements, I was free to pursue opportunities that genuinely excited me. I joined the debate team, started working as a research assistant for Dr. Hartwell, and applied for a summer internship with a civil rights organization in Washington, D.C. I also began seeing a counselor at the campus health center, primarily to help me process the complex emotions surrounding my family situation. Dr. Susan Morrison was a psychologist who specialized in family systems and had extensive experience helping students navigate conflicts between personal growth and family expectations. What you're describing is a common pattern in families where the parents feel threatened by their children's potential, Dr. Morrison explained during one of our sessions. Sometimes this happens because the parents themselves have unfulfilled ambitions or insecurities about their own achievements. Sometimes it's because they've built their identities around being needed by their children, and independence feels like rejection. Her analysis helped me understand that my parents' behavior wasn't really about me or my choices. It was about their own fears and limitations, their own struggles with self-worth and control. This understanding didn't eliminate the pain of their rejection, but it did help me stop taking responsibility for their emotions and reactions. As the semester progressed, I found myself building a chosen family of friends, mentors, and supporters who valued my ambitions and celebrated my achievements. Amanda became like a sister, offering both emotional support and practical advice about navigating academic and social challenges. Dr. Hartwell became an intellectual mentor who pushed me to think more deeply and argue more persuasively. Jennifer Walsh, the Brown alumna I had met before starting college, became an informal career advisor who helped me understand the pathways available to ambitious young women in legal and political fields. The contrast between these supportive relationships and my family dynamics became increasingly stark as the year progressed. My chosen family encouraged me to apply for competitive programs, introduced me to influential professionals in my areas of interest, and celebrated every success with genuine enthusiasm. My biological family continued to send mixed messages about achievement and success, alternately expressing pride in my accomplishments and concern about my priorities. The situation came to a head during finals week of my freshman year. I had been selected for a prestigious summer internship with the American Civil Liberties Union in Washington, D.C., an opportunity that would provide incredible experience in constitutional law and civil rights advocacy. The position was highly competitive, with applicants from top law schools and undergraduate programs across the country. When I called home to share the news, expecting that even my parents would recognize the significance of this opportunity, Patricia's reaction was immediate and predictable. "Washington, D.C., she said, her voice filled with concern. "Rebecca, that's so far away. And isn't that organization quite controversial? I'm not sure this is the kind of association that would be good for your future." The ACLU is one of the most respected civil rights organizations in the country, I explained. This internship would give me experience in exactly the kind of law I want to practice. But what about spending the summer at home? Patricia pressed. You could get a job locally and save money while spending time with your family. Marcus is really hoping you'll be around more this summer. I realized then that no achievement would ever be sufficient to earn my parents' unconditional support. They would always find reasons why my success was problematic, dangerous, or somehow misguided. Their love was contingent on my remaining within the boundaries they had established, and those boundaries were becoming increasingly incompatible with the life I wanted to build. The ACLU internship was extraordinary in every way I had hoped it would be. I spent the summer working on cases involving freedom of speech, religious liberty, and equal protection under the law. My supervisor, Maria Santos, was a brilliant attorney who had argued multiple cases before the Supreme Court and who treated me like a junior colleague rather than a student observer. You have excellent instincts for constitutional analysis, Maria told me during my midsummer evaluation. Have you thought about which law schools you want to apply to? The question was about my future, but it also highlighted how completely my priorities had shifted since starting college. A year earlier, I had been focused on earning my parents' approval and meeting their expectations. Now I was planning a career based on my own interests and abilities, with input from mentors who understood my potential and wanted to help me realize it. I didn't return home that summer until the week before my sophomore year started. The visit was tense and uncomfortable, filled with passive-aggressive comments about my absence and questions about whether I was becoming too important to spend time with my family. Marcus was getting ready for his senior year of high school and was full of questions about college applications and career planning. I'm thinking about applying to some of the same schools you looked at, he told me during one of our private conversations. Mom and Dad say I should focus on state schools, but I think I could get into some really good places. I encouraged him to apply broadly and helped him understand the application process for competitive universities. But I also warned him about the family dynamics he might face if his ambitions exceeded our parents' comfort zone. They're going to try to talk you out of anything that seems too ambitious or prestigious, I said. You need to be prepared for that and decide in advance whether you're going to let their fears limit your choices. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. It's weird how they can be proud of your achievements, but also act like they're problems at the same time. His observation was perceptive and painful because it captured the essential contradiction in our family system. Patricia and Robert wanted to take credit for our successes when it served their narrative, but they also wanted to control and limit those successes when they felt threatening. My sophomore year at Brown was marked by increasing academic success and decreasing communication with my family. I maintained the weekly phone calls I had promised, but these conversations became shorter and more superficial as it became clear that my parents were more interested in monitoring my compliance with their expectations than in learning about my actual experiences. I was selected for the honors program in political science, began working on an independent research project about constitutional interpretation, and was recruited to join the mock trial team. These opportunities were exactly what I had hoped college would provide, but they also represented choices that my family saw as further evidence of my growing arrogance and disconnection from normal priorities. The breaking point came during Thanksgiving of my sophomore year. I had been invited to spend the holiday with Amanda's family in San Francisco, an opportunity to experience a different kind of family dynamic and to explore a part of the country I had never seen. But I decided to go home instead, partly out of obligation and partly because I was still hoping that my family relationships could be repaired. The visit was a disaster from the beginning. Patricia had clearly been building resentment about my summer absence and my general lack of availability, and she used the holiday gathering as an opportunity to air her grievances in front of extended family members. Rebecca's become quite the scholar, she announced during Thanksgiving dinner, her tone suggesting that scholarship was somehow distasteful. She's too busy with her important research to spend much time with the people who raised her. The comment was clearly designed to make me feel guilty and to position my academic achievements as evidence of selfishness or ingratitude. But instead of feeling guilty, I felt angry. Angry at the manipulation, angry at the way my success was being weaponized against me, and angry at myself for continuing to subject myself to this toxic dynamic. My research is about constitutional law and civil rights, I said calmly. I'm studying how legal institutions can be used to protect individual freedoms and promote social justice. I think that's valuable work. Patricia's face flushed, and I could see her preparing to escalate the conflict. I'm sure you think it's very important, she said sarcastically, though I suppose the rest of us are too simple to understand such sophisticated concepts. The room fell silent, with various relatives looking uncomfortable and uncertain about how to respond to the obvious tension between Patricia and me. But I realized in that moment that I was done enabling her manipulation and done sacrificing my self-respect to maintain the illusion of family harmony. I don't think you're simple, I said quietly, but I do think you're threatened by my achievements, and I don't understand why. The accusation hung in the air like smoke, and I watched Patricia process the implications of being called out so directly in front of family members. For a moment, her composed facade completely cracked, and I saw something that looked like panic flash across her features. "How dare you?" she whispered, her voice shaking with rage. "How dare you accuse me of being threatened by you? Everything I've done has been to support you and guide you and protect you from making mistakes that could hurt your future." "What mistakes?" I asked, genuinely curious about her answer. "What exactly are you trying to protect me from?" But Patricia couldn't answer the question because the protection she was offering was protection from success, from ambition, from the possibility of growing beyond the boundaries of her understanding and control. She couldn't say that out loud, especially not in front of an audience, so she retreated into wounded silence and left the table. The rest of the evening was uncomfortable and tense, with various family members trying to smooth over the conflict while clearly not understanding what had caused it. Robert was coldly furious with me for embarrassing Patricia in front of guests, and Marcus looked confused and upset by the obvious dysfunction that had finally erupted into public view. That night, as I lay in my childhood bedroom for what I suspected might be the last time, I made a decision that would fundamentally alter my relationship with my family. I decided to stop pretending that our dysfunction was normal or acceptable, and I decided to stop sacrificing my own well-being to maintain relationships that were fundamentally unhealthy. I left the next morning without saying goodbye to Patricia, though I did have a brief conversation with Robert and a longer one with Marcus. I told Robert that I would no longer be participating in family gatherings that were designed to make me feel guilty for my achievements, and I told Marcus that he would always be welcome in my life regardless of what choices our parents made about their relationship with me. The drive back to Providence felt like emerging from underwater into clear air. For the first time in my life, I had refused to accept responsibility for managing my mother's emotions or accommodating my father's need for control. I had chosen my own well-being over family peace, and instead of feeling guilty, I felt liberated. The rest of my college career was marked by increasing academic and personal success coupled with decreasing contact with my family. I maintained a relationship with Marcus, who was navigating his own conflicts with Patricia and Robert as his college plans became more ambitious. But I stopped calling home regularly, stopped visiting for holidays, and stopped subjecting myself to conversations designed to make me feel guilty for my choices. I graduated summa cum laude with honors in political science and was accepted to Harvard Law School with a full scholarship. The achievements that should have been celebrated by my family were instead met with silence and, eventually, with criticism disguised as concern. "Harvard Law School seems like it might be a bit much," Patricia said during one of our rare phone conversations. "Are you sure you want to put yourself under that kind of pressure? And Boston is so expensive. Maybe a state law school would be more practical." But I was no longer interested in practical limitations or manufactured concerns. I was interested in pursuing excellence and building a career that would allow me to use my abilities to make meaningful contributions to society. Harvard Law School was exactly where I belonged, and I was done apologizing for my ambitions. Law school was challenging and competitive in ways that made my undergraduate experience seem relatively gentle. But it was also intellectually stimulating and professionally valuable in ways that confirmed my choice to pursue legal education at the highest level. I specialized in constitutional law and civil rights, building on the foundation I had established during my ACLU internship and my undergraduate research. During my second year of law school, I received a call that would change my understanding of my family history forever. The caller was a woman named Janet Sullivan, who identified herself as a private investigator working on behalf of a law firm in Hartford. "I'm calling about your adoption records," she said without preamble. "My firm represents the estate of Martha Collins, who I believe was your maternal grandmother. Are you the Rebecca Mitchell who was adopted by Patricia and Robert Mitchell in 1995? The question caught me completely off guard. According to Patricia and Robert, my birth parents had died in a car accident when I was 3, and I had no living relatives who had been interested in maintaining contact. The idea that I had a maternal grandmother who had recently died was completely inconsistent with the story I had been told about my origins. "I think there might be some mistake," I said carefully. "My birth parents died in an accident, and I don't have any other biological family." Janet was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was gentler. "Ms. Mitchell, I think there are some things about your adoption that you may not have been told. Would you be willing to meet with me and the attorney handling Mrs. Collins' estate? I think you'll find the information we have quite significant." The meeting took place the following week in the offices of Morrison, Klein & Associates, a small estate planning firm in downtown Hartford. The attorney, David Morrison, was a man in his 60s who had clearly been practicing law for decades and had the kind of patient, methodical approach that suggested experience with complex family situations. "Before we begin," Mr. Morrison said, settling behind his desk with a thick file folder, "I want you to know that the information we're about to share may be quite different from what you've been told about your family history." Martha Collins was very specific about wanting you to know the truth, but she also understood that this might be difficult to process. He opened the folder and removed a photograph, which he slid across the desk toward me. The image showed a young woman with dark hair and bright eyes, holding a baby who was clearly me based on the date written on the back of the photo. "This is your mother, Sarah Collins," Mr. Morrison said gently. "She was Martha Collins' daughter, and she died when you were 5 years old, not 3 as you may have been told." The photograph was like a window into a past I had never known existed. My mother looked young and happy in the image, gazing down at me with obvious love and tenderness. She didn't look like the tragic figure Patricia had occasionally described in vague terms. She looked like a real person with a real life and real relationships. "Sarah struggled with addiction," Mr. Morrison continued, "but she loved you very much and had been working toward recovery when she died. Martha, your grandmother, had been caring for you periodically during Sarah's treatment periods, and she had hoped to maintain a relationship with you. After the adoption was finalized." He paused, studying my face to gauge my reaction before continuing. "Patricia and Robert Mitchell were friends of Sarah's from college. When Sarah's addiction became severe, they offered to care for you temporarily while she sought treatment. But after Sarah died, they pursued permanent adoption, and they were not entirely forthcoming about your background or about Martha's desire to remain involved in your life." The revelation was staggering in its implications. Everything I had been told about my origins was either a lie or a significant distortion of the truth. I had a grandmother who had wanted to know me, a mother who had loved me, and a family history that had been deliberately concealed from me. "What happened to my grandmother?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Martha tried for several years to maintain contact with you," Mr. Morrison explained, removing additional documents from the folder. "She filed legal motions requesting visitation rights, sent letters and gifts that were never delivered, and even hired private investigators to monitor your well-being from a distance. But Patricia and Robert claimed that contact with your biological family would be confusing and potentially harmful to your adjustment." He showed me copies of court documents, letters from Martha to various family court judges, and even photographs that Martha had taken from a distance during my childhood school events. The evidence painted a picture of a woman who had been desperate to maintain a connection with her only grandchild, but had been systematically excluded by adoptive parents who wanted to erase any trace of my biological heritage. "Eventually, Martha was forced to give up her legal efforts," Mr. Morrison continued. "But she never stopped hoping that you would seek her out when you became an adult. She established a trust fund for your education and future, and she left detailed instructions about what she wanted you to know about your mother and your family history." The trust fund that Martha had established contained nearly $200,000, money that had been intended to support my education and early career. But more valuable than the money were the personal items she had preserved: photographs of my mother throughout her life, letters Sarah had written expressing her love for me and her determination to overcome her addiction, artwork that Sarah had created during her periods of sobriety, and detailed family histories that revealed rich heritage I had never known existed. "There's one more thing," Mr. Morrison said, his voice becoming even more serious. "Martha was quite specific about wanting you to understand the circumstances of your adoption. She believed that Patricia and Robert had acted deceptively, and she wanted you to have evidence of what really happened." He removed a final set of documents from the folder: correspondence between Martha and Patricia during the period after Sarah's death. The letters revealed a complex negotiation about my future, with Martha offering to take custody of me herself or to arrange for shared custody that would allow me to maintain connections with both families. Patricia's responses to these offers were illuminating in their coldness and manipulation. She consistently argued that contact with my biological family would be harmful to my psychological development, that Martha was too old and financially unstable to provide proper care, and that a complete break with my past was in my best interests. But the most damaging document was a letter from Patricia to the family court judge handling my adoption case. In it, She claimed that Martha was an alcoholic who had enabled Sarah's addiction and that allowing contact between us would expose me to dangerous influences. The allegations were demonstrably false, supported by character references and professional evaluations that Martha had provided to counter them. Your grandmother was not an alcoholic, Mr. Morrison said firmly. She was a retired librarian who had devoted her life to caring for Sarah and trying to help her overcome her addiction. The claims Patricia made to prevent contact were fabricated. I sat in that law office for nearly 3 hours, reviewing documents and photographs that revealed the true story of my origins. My mother had been a complex person who had struggled with serious problems, but she had also been an artist and a loving mother who had wanted the best for me. My grandmother had been a devoted woman who had fought for years to remain part of my life, and who had never stopped hoping that we would eventually be reunited. Most devastating of all was the realization that Patricia and Robert had not only lied to me about my family history, but had actively worked to prevent me from having relationships with people who loved me and wanted to be part of my life. They had stolen not just my inheritance, but my identity, my heritage, and my right to make informed choices about my own family relationships. When I finally left the law office, I felt like I was walking through a different world than the one I had inhabited that morning. Everything I thought I knew about my life had been built on lies and manipulation. The family I had spent 23 years trying to please had betrayed me in ways that went far beyond ordinary dysfunction or misguided protection. The drive back to Cambridge was a blur of complicated emotions. Grief for the grandmother I had never known, anger at the deception that had robbed me of important relationships, and a strange sense of relief at finally understanding why my relationship with Patricia and Robert had always felt so troubled and conditional. I spent that evening in my small apartment near Harvard, reading through Martha's letters and looking at photographs of my mother. Sarah had been beautiful in a way that was completely different from Patricia's polished perfection. She had wild, curly hair and an infectious smile, and even in the photographs that showed her during difficult periods, there was a warmth and authenticity that came through clearly. The letters Sarah had written to Martha during her attempts at recovery were heartbreaking in their honesty and hope. She wrote about missing me terribly, about wanting to become the mother I deserved, about her dreams for our future together. She had been planning to complete a treatment program and regain custody when she died of an accidental overdose. I know Rebecca is too young to understand why Mommy can't be with her right now, Sarah had written in one letter. But I want her to know that I love her more than anything in the world, and that everything I'm doing is so we can be together again. I want to be the kind of mother who makes her proud. Reading those words, I felt a grief that was both fresh and ancient. I mourned the mother I had never really known and the relationship we had been prevented from having. But I also felt a connection to Sarah that was deeper and more authentic than anything I had ever experienced with Patricia. Sarah's love for me had been complicated by her struggles, but it had been real and unconditional in a way that Patricia's love had never been. The next few weeks were a period of intense emotional processing and difficult decision-making. I was in the middle of my second year of law school, with final exams approaching and law review responsibilities that demanded my attention. But I was also grappling with fundamental questions about my identity and my relationships that couldn't be postponed or compartmentalized. I decided to call Marcus before making any decisions about how to handle the information I had learned. He was a senior in college now, having chosen to attend the University of Vermont despite Patricia and Robert's efforts to convince him to stay closer to home. Our relationship had remained strong throughout my estrangement from our parents, and I trusted his judgment about family matters. I need to tell you something that's going to be hard to hear, I said when he answered the phone. Then I spent the next hour explaining what I had learned about my adoption, my biological family, and the lies that Patricia and Robert had built our family history on. Marcus was quiet for a long time after I finished talking. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with anger and disbelief. They lied about everything, he said finally. They kept you from your grandmother, they stole your inheritance, and they made you feel guilty for 18 years about being grateful for a family that was supposedly all you had in the world. His summary was accurate and devastating. But what struck me most was his immediate understanding of the implications and his complete lack of defensiveness about our parents' actions. Marcus had reached the same conclusions about Patricia and Robert's behavior that I had been struggling with for years. "What are you going to do?" he asked. It was the question I had been wrestling with since leaving Mr. Morrison's office. I had legal options for recovering my inheritance and potentially pursuing civil claims against Patricia and Robert for fraud and emotional distress. I had personal options for confronting them with the truth and demanding explanations for their deceptions. And I had the option of simply walking away entirely, using the knowledge I had gained to understand my past without necessarily taking action to address the wrongs that had been committed. I think I need to confront them, I said finally. Not because I expect them to apologize or change, but because I need them to know that I know the truth. Marcus was supportive of whatever decision I made, but he also warned me to be prepared for their likely reactions. They're not going to admit they did anything wrong, he said. They're going to find ways to justify everything and probably try to make you feel guilty for questioning them. He was right, of course, but I had learned enough about healthy relationships and personal boundaries to understand that confrontation wasn't always about achieving resolution with the other party. Sometimes it was about claiming your own truth and refusing to carry the weight of other people's deceptions. I decided to meet with Patricia and Robert in person, both because the conversation seemed too important for a phone call and because I wanted to see their faces when I presented them with evidence of their lies. I arranged to drive to Connecticut the following weekend, telling them only that I needed to discuss some important family matters. The house on Maple Street looked exactly the same as it had during my childhood, but approaching it with full knowledge of what Patricia and Robert had concealed from me felt like entering a crime scene. Everything that had once seemed elegant and welcoming now appeared calculated and artificial, designed to create an impression of stability and success that masked deeper dysfunction. Patricia greeted me with her usual performance of maternal warmth, commenting on how thin I looked and whether I was eating properly at law school. Robert emerged from his study with the distracted air of someone who had been interrupted during important work. Both of them seemed pleased that I had initiated contact after months of limited communication. We sat in the living room where I had spent countless hours as a child, doing homework and reading while Patricia entertained her friends and planned her elaborate social events. The room was still immaculately decorated, every surface polished, and every cushion perfectly positioned, but now it felt like a museum exhibit of artificial domesticity. "So," Patricia said with the bright smile she used when she was particularly pleased about something, "what brings you home for a visit? Are you finally ready to admit that all this academic pressure has been too much?" The question revealed that she was still operating under the assumption that our previous conflicts had been about my inability to handle the challenges I had chosen rather than about their inability to support my choices. She seemed to think that I had come home to surrender, to acknowledge that they had been right about my limitations and their concerns. Instead, I placed the folder from Mr. Morrison's office on the coffee table between us. "I've learned some interesting things about my adoption," I said calmly. "Things that I think we need to discuss." I watched their faces as I spoke, noting the way Patricia's smile faltered and Robert's expression became guarded. They exchanged a quick glance that confirmed they knew exactly what I was referring to, even before I opened the folder. "I don't understand," Patricia said, though her voice lacked its usual confidence. "What kinds of things?" I removed the photograph of my mother holding me as a baby and placed it on the table where they could see it clearly. The image seemed to fill the room with its emotional weight, a tangible reminder of the relationships they had worked so hard to erase. "I met with the attorney handling Martha Collins' estate," I said, continuing to watch their reactions. "My grandmother left me quite a bit of information about my family history. Information that's very different from what you told me." The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia stared at the photograph with an expression I had never seen before, something that looked like panic mixed with resignation. Robert's face had gone completely pale, and he was gripping the arm of his chair with enough force to make his knuckles white. "Rebecca," Patricia began, her voice taking on the placating tone she used when she was trying to manage a difficult situation. "Whatever you think you've learned, you need to understand that we did what we thought was best for you. Sometimes adults have to make difficult decisions to protect children from painful truths." "What painful truths?" I asked. "That my mother loved me? That my grandmother wanted to be part of my life? That I had family who cared about me and wanted to maintain relationships with me?" Patricia's composure began to crack as I continued speaking. "You told me my parents died in a car accident when I was 3, but Sarah died when I was 5, and she wasn't in an accident. You told me I had no other family, but Martha fought for years to maintain contact with me. You told me the adoption was a rescue, but it was actually a kidnapping. The word kidnapping hit them like a physical blow. Robert stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger and what might have been fear. That's enough, he said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used in court. I don't know what lies someone has been filling your head with, but you're way out of line. We loved you and cared for you when no one else could or would. We gave you opportunities and stability that you never would have had otherwise. You gave me opportunities that I earned through my own abilities. I corrected. And you only supported those opportunities when they served your narrative about being generous, selfless parents. Every time I achieved something that went beyond your comfort zone, you tried to sabotage it. I began removing additional documents from the folder. Martha's letters requesting visitation, Patricia's responses denying contact, court records showing the trust fund that had been established for my education, and financial documents proving that substantial money had been set aside for my future. You didn't just lie about my family history. I continued, placing each document on the table with deliberate precision. You stole my inheritance. You prevented me from having relationships with people who loved me. And you spent 18 years making me feel guilty for existing when you knew the entire time that I had family who wanted me. Patricia was crying now, but her tears felt manipulative rather than genuine. Rebecca, please, she said, reaching toward me with the gesture of supplication she had perfected over years of managing family conflicts. You don't understand how complicated the situation was. Sarah was sick, and Martha was enabling her addiction. We were trying to protect you from chaos and instability. Martha was a retired librarian with no history of addiction or instability, I said, consulting the character references and professional evaluations that had been included in the legal documents. Sarah was in treatment and making progress toward recovery. The claims you made to prevent contact with my family were lies. Robert was pacing now, his face red with the kind of anger he usually reserved for opposing counsel who had committed professional misconduct. You have no idea what you're talking about, he said, his voice rising to a volume that would have terrified me as a child. That woman was manipulative and demanding. She wanted to interfere with our family and confuse you about your loyalties. We did what any responsible parents would do. Responsible parents don't steal their children's inheritance, I said calmly. Responsible parents don't fabricate lies about their children's backgrounds. Responsible parents don't prevent their children from having relationships with loving family members. I stood up, gathering the documents and photographs back into the folder. The confrontation had accomplished what I had hoped it would. It had given me the opportunity to speak my truth and to make it clear that I was no longer willing to accept their version of reality. I'm leaving now, I said, moving toward the front door. I wanted you to know that I know the truth about what you did and why you did it. I wanted you to understand that I'm no longer willing to pretend that your behavior was motivated by love or protection. Patricia followed me to the door, still crying and still trying to find arguments that would make me reconsider my judgment of their actions. Rebecca, please don't leave like this, she pleaded. You're our daughter. We love you. We made mistakes, but we were trying to do what was best. I paused at the threshold, looking back at the woman who had raised me and who had also betrayed me in the most fundamental ways possible. Love doesn't require stealing someone's identity, I said quietly. Love doesn't require preventing someone from knowing their own family. What you did wasn't love, it was possession. I drove away from Maple Street for what I knew would be the last time, feeling a complex mixture of grief and liberation. I grieved for the family I had lost, but I also celebrated the freedom I had gained. I would never again have to carry the weight of their deceptions or manage their emotional reactions to my success. The legal proceedings to recover my inheritance were straightforward but lengthy. Patricia and Robert initially claimed that they had been unaware of the trust fund's existence, but the documentation from Martha's estate made it clear that they had been informed of its establishment and had chosen not to disclose it to me. Their attorney eventually advised them to settle rather than face a civil trial that would have exposed their deceptions to public scrutiny. The settlement included not just the trust fund money with accumulated interest, but also additional compensation for the emotional distress caused by their fraud. More importantly, it included a requirement that they provide me with all documents, photographs, and personal items related to my biological family that they had kept hidden. Among these items was a collection of letters that Sarah had written to me during her periods in treatment, letters that Patricia and Robert had intercepted and hidden. Reading these letters was both heartbreaking and healing, as they revealed the depth of my mother's love and her dreams for our future together. "My beautiful Rebecca," one letter began, "I know you're too little to read this now, but someday when you're older, I want you to know how much Mommy loves you and how hard I'm working to get better so we can be together again. I'm learning how to be the kind of mother you deserve, and I promise I'm going to make you proud." The letters painted a picture of a young woman who had struggled with serious problems, but who had also been committed to overcoming them for my sake. Sarah had been enrolled in a long-term treatment program and had been making significant progress when she died. Her death had been truly accidental, the result of a single relapse during what her counselors had described as a period of exceptional progress. Reading these letters helped me understand that I had been loved unconditionally by my biological mother, just as I had been loved conditionally by my adoptive parents. The contrast was stark and painful, but it also provided a foundation for healing that I had never had before. I graduated from Harvard Law School magna cum laude and was offered positions with several prestigious firms specializing in civil rights law. I chose to work with an organization focused on family law and adoption reform, using my own experiences to help other adoptees navigate complex family situations and recover their identities. Marcus graduated from the University of Vermont and decided to pursue graduate school in social work, partly inspired by our family experiences and partly because he wanted to help other young people navigate difficult family dynamics. We remained close throughout these years, supporting each other through the ongoing process of understanding our childhood and building healthy adult relationships. I met David Rodriguez during my second year of practice, when we were working on opposite sides of a case involving parental rights and child welfare. He was a family court judge who had a reputation for fairness and insight, and our professional relationship gradually developed into a personal one based on shared values and mutual respect. David came from a large, loving Mexican-American family that welcomed me with the kind of unconditional acceptance I had never experienced before. His parents, Maria and Carlos, treated me like a daughter from our first meeting, including me in family celebrations and asking my opinions about everything from career decisions to holiday plans. "Family is who loves you and supports your dreams," Maria told me during one of our conversations about my complicated background. "Blood and legal papers are just details. What matters is how people treat you and whether they want you to be happy." Her perspective helped me understand that I had been searching for family in the wrong places for most of my life. The family I had been born into and the family I had been adopted into had both failed me in different ways, but that didn't mean I was destined to be alone. I could create the family I needed through the relationships I chose to nurture and maintain. David and I were married 3 years after we met, in a ceremony that was attended by Marcus, my colleagues from work, David's extended family, and several of the adoptees I had helped through my legal practice. Patricia and Robert were not invited, though I did send them a brief announcement about the wedding as a matter of courtesy. The response came from Patricia, a long letter that alternated between congratulations and self-pity, expressing hope that marriage would help me understand the importance of family loyalty and forgiveness. I read the letter once and then filed it away without responding, understanding that engaging with her attempts at manipulation would only recreate the unhealthy dynamics I had worked so hard to escape. David and I bought a house in a neighborhood that reminded me of the best aspects of my childhood home: tree-lined streets, well-maintained properties, and a sense of community among the residents. But unlike the house on Maple Street, our home was filled with warmth and authenticity rather than performance and control. We hosted regular dinners for friends and colleagues, creating the kind of gathering space I had always wanted but had never experienced. Marcus was a frequent visitor, often bringing girlfriends or graduate school friends who quickly became part of our extended chosen family. David's parents visited several times a year, treating our guest room like their own space and filling our kitchen with the sense of authentic Mexican cooking. 2 years after our wedding, I received an unexpected phone call from a social worker in Hartford. Patricia had been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's disease, and Robert was struggling to manage her care while maintaining his law practice. The social worker was calling because my name was listed as Patricia's daughter in her medical records, and they were trying to notify family members about her condition. The news was complicated and emotionally difficult to process. Whatever Patricia's failures as a mother, the idea of her facing a degenerative illness was genuinely sad. But I also recognized that her illness didn't erase the harm she had caused or create an obligation for me to resume a relationship that had been fundamentally unhealthy. I discussed the situation with David and with my therapist, Dr. Sarah Winters, whom I had been seeing periodically to help me process the ongoing effects of my childhood experiences. Dr. Winters helped me understand that I could feel compassion for Patricia's illness without taking responsibility for her care or exposing myself to renewed manipulation. You can acknowledge that this is sad and difficult without believing that you're required to sacrifice your own well-being, Dr. Winters explained. Sometimes the most caring thing you can do is maintain the boundaries that protect both of you from recreating harmful patterns. I decided to send a card expressing my sympathy about Patricia's diagnosis and offering to provide information about her condition to Marcus, who was geographically closer and might choose to have some involvement in her care. But I made it clear that I would not be resuming regular contact or taking on caregiving responsibilities. Robert responded with a bitter letter accusing me of heartlessness and ingratitude, reminding me of everything they had supposedly sacrificed to raise me, and suggesting that refusing to help during Patricia's illness proved that I had never truly been part of their family. The letter was so laden with manipulation and guilt-mongering that it actually reinforced my decision to maintain distance rather than making me reconsider it. Marcus chose to have limited involvement in Patricia's care, visiting occasionally and helping Robert navigate some of the practical challenges of managing her declining cognitive function. But he also maintained the boundaries he had established during his own process of separating from their dysfunction, refusing to accept guilt or responsibility for problems he hadn't created. "It's sad that she's sick," Marcus told me during one of our regular phone calls. "But being sick doesn't make someone a different person. She's still the same person who lied to you about your family and tried to sabotage your education. I can feel sorry for her without pretending that our relationship was healthy." His perspective reflected the emotional maturity he had developed through his own process of understanding our family dynamics and choosing healthier relationships. We both recognized that compassion could coexist with boundaries, that you could wish someone well without sacrificing your own well-being to care for them. 3 years after Patricia's diagnosis, David and I welcomed our first child, a daughter we named Sarah Elena Rodriguez Mitchell. The decision to give her my biological mother's name was both a tribute to the mother I had never really known and a declaration that my daughter would grow up understanding her full heritage rather than a sanitized version designed to serve other people's comfort. Sarah Elena was born into a family that celebrated her existence unconditionally, surrounded by grandparents who delighted in her every milestone and extended family members who treated her like a precious gift. Watching David's parents with our daughter gave me a model for the kind of grandparent relationships I had been denied, and it also highlighted just how abnormal my own childhood experiences had been. When Sarah Elena was 6 months old, I received a call from the funeral home in Hartford. Patricia had died peacefully in her sleep, her Alzheimer's disease having progressed more rapidly than anyone had anticipated. Robert was arranging a small memorial service and wondered if I would like to attend or contribute to the arrangements. I felt sad about Patricia's death, but not in the way I had expected. I mourned for the mother she could have been, for the relationship we might have had if she had been capable of loving me without conditions or limitations. But I didn't mourn for the relationship we had actually had, because that relationship had been fundamentally damaged from the beginning. I decided not to attend the funeral, partly because I didn't want to create drama during a difficult time for the people who were genuinely grieving, and partly because I recognized that my presence would be more about performance than authentic mourning. Instead, I sent flowers with a simple card expressing condolences to Robert and the other family members who were attending. Marcus attended the service and reported that it was a small gathering, mostly consisting of Robert's colleagues and a few longtime family friends. Several people asked about my absence, and Marcus deflected their questions by explaining that I was caring for a new baby and couldn't travel. "It was weird," Marcus told me afterward. "People kept talking about what a devoted mother she was and how much she loved her children. I kept thinking about how different their perception was from our actual experience. His observation highlighted one of the most challenging aspects of having survived psychological abuse: the disconnect between public perception and private reality. Patricia had been skilled at maintaining the appearance of loving motherhood while engaging in behaviors that were fundamentally harmful to my development and well-being. After Patricia's death, Robert made several attempts to resume contact with me, claiming that her illness had been responsible for much of the family conflict and that he wanted to rebuild our relationship now that she was gone. His overtures felt manipulative and self-serving, focused on his own need for family connection rather than any genuine understanding of the harm that had been caused. I responded to his letters with polite but firm statements about my boundaries and my lack of interest in resuming a relationship. I made it clear that Patricia's death didn't change my understanding of what had happened during my childhood or my assessment of his role in the deceptions and manipulation. Eventually, Robert stopped reaching out, though Marcus reported that he continued to ask about me during their occasional conversations. Robert's inability to understand or accept my boundaries was consistent with the patterns of behavior I had observed throughout my childhood, confirming that my decision to maintain distance was appropriate and necessary. As Sarah Elena grew from an infant into a toddler, I found myself reflecting often on the differences between my childhood and hers. She was surrounded by adults who celebrated her curiosity, encouraged her questions, and supported her natural development without trying to shape her into a predetermined mold. When she showed interest in books, we bought her more books. When she demonstrated musical aptitude, we arranged for music lessons. When she asked difficult questions, we answered them honestly in age-appropriate ways. The contrast with my own upbringing was stark and sometimes painful. I remembered being discouraged from pursuing advanced academic opportunities, being told that my interests were impractical or inappropriate, being made to feel guilty for having ambitions that extended beyond my parents' comfort zone. Sarah Elena would never experience those limitations because David and I were committed to supporting her authentic development rather than our own need for control. When Sarah Elena was 3 years old, she began asking questions about her extended family and wondering why she had only one set of grandparents. David and I had discussed how to handle these questions in advance, and we decided to give her age-appropriate information about our family history without burdening her with details she was too young to understand. Mama had different parents when she was little, I explained during one of these conversations. Those parents made some choices that weren't very kind, so Mama decided to build a new family with people who love her better. Sarah Elena accepted this explanation with the matter-of-fact adaptability of childhood, filing it away with other facts about how families can be configured differently. As she grew older, we would provide more details about adoption, family conflict, and the importance of choosing relationships that are healthy and supportive. I wanted her to understand that family relationships should be sources of strength and encouragement rather than sources of stress and limitation. I wanted her to know that it's possible to love people while also maintaining boundaries with them, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone else's dysfunctional behavior. My work with adoptees and families in crisis continued to be both professionally satisfying and personally meaningful. I specialized in cases involving identity theft, family fraud, and situations where adoptive families had concealed important information about children's backgrounds. My own experiences gave me unique insight into the psychological impact of these deceptions and the legal strategies that were most effective for recovering stolen inheritances and identities. One of my most significant cases involved a young man named James Wu, whose adoptive parents had concealed the fact that his biological parents were both alive and had been seeking contact with him for years. The adoptive parents had intercepted letters, blocked phone calls, and even moved to different states to prevent reunification. When James finally learned the truth at age 25, he was devastated by the lost relationships and the years of deception. "I feel like my entire life was built on lies," James told me during our first consultation. "How do I even begin to rebuild relationships with people I should have known all along?" His situation was remarkably similar to mine, and I was able to help him navigate both the legal process of recovering his identity documents and inheritance and the emotional process of deciding how to handle his relationships with the adoptive parents who had betrayed him. "The most important thing to remember," I told James, "is that you can't control other people's choices, but you can control your own responses. You can choose to build relationships with people who respect and support you. And you can choose to maintain boundaries with people who don't. Working with clients like James reminded me regularly of how far I had come in my own healing process and how much my childhood experiences had equipped me to help other people navigate similar challenges. The pain I had experienced had been transformed into a source of strength and expertise that allowed me to make meaningful contributions to other people's lives. David and I welcomed our second child, a son we named Marcus David, when Sarah Elena was 4 years old. The choice to name him after my brother reflected the importance of the relationship I had maintained with the one family member who had consistently supported my growth and independence. Marcus was thrilled to have a nephew named after him and became an even more frequent visitor after Marcus David's birth. He had completed his graduate degree in social work and was working with at-risk youth in Burlington, Vermont. His career choice had been influenced by our family experiences, and he often consulted with me about cases involving family dysfunction and young people who were trying to escape toxic relationships. It's weird how our childhood experiences prepared us to help other people in similar situations, Marcus observed during one of his visits. Like, all that dysfunction wasn't completely wasted if we can use what we learned to prevent other kids from going through the same things. His perspective reflected the same process of meaning-making that had characterized my own healing journey. Neither of us would have chosen to experience the deception and manipulation that had marked our childhood, but we had both found ways to transform those experiences into sources of strength and professional purpose. When Sarah Elena was 5 and Marcus David was 1, I received an unexpected letter from Robert. He was retiring from his law practice and had been diagnosed with a serious heart condition that required immediate surgery and ongoing treatment. The letter was clearly intended to elicit sympathy and to create one final opportunity for reconciliation before he potentially died. "I know I made mistakes as a father," Robert wrote, "and I know you feel hurt by some of the decisions Patricia and I made about your adoption and upbringing. But I want you to know that everything we did was motivated by love and a desire to protect you from pain. I hope that now that you're a parent yourself, you can understand how difficult it is to always make the right choices for your children." The letter was a masterpiece of manipulation, combining health concerns with false equivalencies and emotional appeals designed to make me feel guilty for maintaining my boundaries. Robert was suggesting that my choices as a parent were somehow comparable to his choices to lie about my identity and steal my inheritance, and that parenthood should make me more sympathetic to his position. I discussed the letter with David and Dr. Winters before deciding how to respond. Both of them helped me recognize that Robert's illness, while genuinely unfortunate, didn't create an obligation for me to resume a relationship that had been fundamentally harmful to my well-being. Difficult parenting decisions are things like whether to allow your teenager to go to a party or how to handle discipline for bad behavior. Dr. Winters pointed out, systematically lying to your child about their identity and stealing their inheritance are not difficult parenting decisions. They're forms of abuse. I responded to Robert's letter with a brief note expressing my hope that his surgery would be successful and his recovery complete, but making it clear that I would not be resuming contact or visiting during his illness. I wished him well without accepting responsibility for managing his emotional needs or providing the forgiveness he was seeking. Robert survived his surgery and made a full recovery, though Marcus reported that the experience had made him more reflective about his mortality and his legacy. Robert had apparently hoped that his health scare would motivate me to reconcile with him, and he was disappointed and confused by my continued refusal to engage. "He keeps asking me what it would take for you to forgive him," Marcus told me during one of our conversations. "I don't think he understands that this isn't about forgiveness. It's about protecting yourself from someone who has shown he can't be trusted." Marcus's understanding of my position reflected the emotional intelligence he had developed through his own process of setting boundaries with our parents. He recognized that forgiveness and reconciliation were separate concepts, and that you could forgive someone without choosing to have an ongoing relationship with them. As my children grew older and my career continued to flourish, I found myself reflecting often on the concept of legacy and what it means to build a life that honors both your past and your future. My biological mother, Sarah, had left me a legacy of creativity and love that had been temporarily obscured but never destroyed. My grandmother, Martha, had left me a legacy of determination and hope that had ultimately enabled my independence and success. Patricia and Robert had also left me a legacy, though not the one they had intended. Their deception and manipulation had taught me to value honesty and authenticity above all else. Their conditional love had made me determined to offer unconditional acceptance to my own children. Their attempts to control my ambitions had made me committed to supporting other people's dreams and goals. Every choice I made as a parent, as a professional, and as a person was informed by my understanding of what healthy relationships look like and what they require. I had learned through painful experience that love without respect is not really love, that family relationships should enhance rather than diminish your sense of self-worth, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone else's dysfunction. When Sarah Elena turned 8 and Marcus David was 4, I decided it was time to share more detailed information about our family history with them. Sarah Elena had been asking increasingly sophisticated questions about why she didn't have maternal grandparents, and I wanted her to understand the truth before she was old enough to feel confused or rejected by their absence. I chose a quiet evening when David was home, and we had plenty of time to talk through any questions or concerns that might arise. Sarah Elena curled up next to me on the couch, while Marcus David played with his blocks on the floor, and I began to tell them the story of my childhood in terms they could understand. When Mama was little, I explained, she lived with parents who said they loved her, but they didn't act loving all the time. They told her lies about her real family and tried to make her feel bad for being smart and successful. Sarah Elena listened with the intense focus she brought to all important conversations, asking clarifying questions and making connections that showed she was processing the information thoughtfully. "Did they hurt you?" she asked, her 8-year-old understanding of family dysfunction primarily focused on physical harm. "They hurt my feelings," I said carefully. "They made choices that were meant to control me rather than help me grow into the person I was meant to be. So when I became an adult, I decided to build a new family with people who love me the way families should love each other." Marcus David looked up from his blocks, drawn into the conversation by the serious tone even though most of the content was beyond his understanding. "Are we your new family?" he asked with the directness of a 4-year-old. "You and Daddy and Uncle Marcus and Grandma Maria and Grandpa Carlos are my real family," I confirmed. "Family means people who love you no matter what, who want you to be happy and successful, and who support your dreams." The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with both children asking questions about adoption, family conflict, and the difference between biological and chosen family relationships. I was careful to provide honest answers without overwhelming them with details they weren't ready to process. Sarah Elena seemed to understand intuitively that some people and families make harmful choices, and that children aren't responsible for fixing or excusing those choices. Marcus David was more focused on reassurance that our current family was stable and loving, which we were able to provide confidently. "Will you ever talk to your old parents again?" Sarah Elena asked near the end of our conversation. "I don't think so," I answered honestly. "Sometimes when people hurt you badly enough, the healthiest choice is to love them from a distance and focus on building relationships with people who treat you well." She nodded thoughtfully, accepting this explanation with the remarkable adaptability that children bring to complex family situations. Both children seemed to understand that family relationships should feel safe and supportive, and that it was reasonable to avoid relationships that didn't meet those standards. Over the following months, Sarah Elena occasionally brought up our conversation, asking follow-up questions or making observations about how our family was different from the one I had grown up in. Her questions revealed that she was developing a sophisticated understanding of healthy relationship dynamics and the importance of mutual respect and support. "Our family feels happy," she told me one evening as I was tucking her into bed. "Like everyone wants everyone else to be their best self." Her observation was perceptive and touching, capturing exactly what David and I had tried to create in our home. We wanted our children to grow up understanding that family love should feel expansive rather than restrictive, encouraging rather than limiting, joyful rather than stressful. When Sarah Elena was 10 and Marcus David was 6, I received news that would test my commitment to maintaining boundaries with my past. Robert had died suddenly of a massive heart attack, leaving behind a will that contained several surprises and complications. The attorney handling Robert's estate called to inform me that I had been named as a beneficiary, despite our years of estrangement. Robert had left me a significant sum of money along with a collection of documents and photographs from my childhood. The bequest came with a letter that the attorney was instructed to deliver only if I chose to claim the inheritance. I was conflicted about whether to accept Robert's final gesture, unsure whether it represented genuine remorse or one last attempt to manipulate my emotions from beyond the grave. I discussed the situation extensively with David, Marcus, and Dr. Winters before deciding to meet with the estate attorney and review what Robert had left me. The letter that accompanied the bequest was unlike anything Robert had written to me during his lifetime. It was a detailed confession of the deceptions he and Patricia had perpetrated, along with what appeared to be genuine expressions of regret for the harm they had caused. By the time you read this, Robert's letter began, "I will be dead, and you will have the choice of whether to forgive a man who spent your entire childhood making terrible decisions out of fear and selfishness." The letter went on to detail the circumstances of my adoption, confirming much of what I had learned from Martha's estate, but providing additional context about Robert and Patricia's motivations. They had been struggling with infertility for years when Sarah's addiction created an opportunity for them to become parents. But instead of approaching the situation with honesty and generosity, they had seen it as a chance to obtain a child while erasing any complications related to my biological family. "We convinced ourselves that we were protecting you from an unstable situation," Robert wrote. "But the truth is that we were protecting ourselves from having to share you with people who had prior claims on your love and loyalty. We wanted you to belong to us completely, and we were willing to lie and steal to make that happen." The letter included apologies for concealing my inheritance, for lying about my family history, for discouraging my academic achievements, and for making me feel guilty about pursuing excellence. Robert acknowledged that their behavior had been motivated by insecurity and control rather than love and protection. "I know that apologizing after death is cowardly," the letter concluded, "and I know that money cannot undo the damage we caused to your sense of identity and family connection. But I wanted you to know that I spent the last years of my life understanding how wrong we were and wishing I could find a way to repair what we had broken." The letter was accompanied by boxes of photographs, documents, and personal items from my childhood that Robert had preserved. Many of these items were things I had never seen before: report cards with teachers' comments about my exceptional abilities, letters from schools and programs that had tried to recruit me for advanced opportunities, and even some artwork and writing I had done as a child that Patricia had claimed to throw away. Looking through these materials was like archaeological excavation of my own past, revealing layers of experience and achievement that had been systematically minimized or erased during my childhood. The documentation showed clearly that my academic abilities had been recognized by multiple adults throughout my education, and that opportunities for acceleration and enrichment had been repeatedly declined by my parents without my knowledge. I also found letters that Martha had written to Robert and Patricia over the years, continuing to request contact with me long after the formal legal battles had ended. These letters revealed a grandmother who had never stopped hoping for reconciliation and who had continued to follow my achievements from a distance through newspaper articles and school announcements. The most painful discovery was a collection of birthday and Christmas cards that Martha had sent to me throughout my childhood, all of which had been intercepted and hidden. The cards contained age-appropriate messages of love and encouragement, along with small gifts like bookmarks and art supplies that reflected her understanding of my interests and personality. Reading these cards was heartbreaking because they revealed that I had been loved and remembered by my grandmother throughout my childhood, even though I had been told that I had no biological family who cared about me. Martha had maintained hope for our relationship even when it seemed impossible, and she had continued to express love for me even when that love couldn't be reciprocated. After reviewing all of the materials Robert had left me, I decided to accept the inheritance, not because I forgave him or because his apology eliminated the harm he had caused, but because the money and documents represented resources that could be used for positive purposes. I donated a significant portion of the inheritance to organizations that helped adoptees search for biological family members and that advocated for transparency in adoption proceedings. I kept the photographs and documents that helped me understand my own history, and I shared some of these materials with Sarah, Elena, and Marcus David as they grew older and became curious about their extended family background. The children were fascinated by the pictures of me as a child, and they asked thoughtful questions about why adults sometimes make harmful choices and how families can heal from difficult experiences. It's sad that your first parents couldn't figure out how to love you the right way, Sarah Elena observed when she was 12 and had heard more of the complete story. But it's good that you learn how to love us the right way instead. Her comment reflected the resilience and wisdom that children often bring to complex family situations. She understood that people can learn from painful experiences and make different choices for their own families, and she felt secure in the knowledge that our family was built on healthier foundations. Marcus continued to be an important part of our lives, visiting regularly and maintaining close relationships with both of my children. He had married a wonderful woman named Jennifer, a teacher who shared his commitment to helping young people navigate difficult circumstances. They had 2 children of their own, and our families often spent holidays and vacations together, creating the kind of extended family gatherings that felt warm and authentic rather than performative. Marcus never resumed significant contact with Robert before his death, though he had occasionally called to check on Robert's health and well-being. Marcus felt sad about Robert's death, but not devastated, recognizing that their relationship had been damaged beyond repair by years of manipulation and control. I feel like I lost the father I wished I'd had rather than the father I actually had, Marcus told me during Robert's funeral, which he attended briefly out of respect for the family friends who were genuinely mourning. The father I actually had disappeared a long time ago, if he ever really existed. His perspective reflected the same kind of clarity and emotional boundaries that I had developed through years of therapy and reflection. We both understood that you could mourn the loss of potential relationships while also accepting the reality of the relationships that had actually existed. My career continued to evolve and expand, focusing increasingly on policy advocacy and systemic reform in addition to individual case representation. I testified before state legislatures about the need for better oversight of adoption proceedings and stronger protections for adoptees' rights to access their own family history and inheritance information. Every person deserves to know the truth about their own origins, I told the Connecticut State Senate during hearings on adoption reform legislation. Deception and concealment in adoption proceedings don't protect children. They rob them of their fundamental right to understand their own identity and heritage. The legislation I helped draft became a model for similar laws in other states, requiring greater transparency in adoption proceedings and establishing stronger penalties for adoptive parents who concealed important information about children's backgrounds or inheritance rights. The work felt like a meaningful way to honor both my own experiences and the experiences of other adoptees who had been similarly betrayed by the adults responsible for their care. When Sarah Elena was 14 and Marcus David was 10, our family faced a crisis that tested everything we had built together. David was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer that required aggressive treatment and created significant uncertainty about his prognosis. The diagnosis was shocking and terrifying, forcing all of us to confront the possibility that our family might be fundamentally altered by circumstances beyond our control. The next 18 months were the most difficult period of our marriage and family life. David underwent multiple surgeries and rounds of chemotherapy, experiencing side effects that left him exhausted and sometimes unable to participate in normal family activities. I juggled my work responsibilities with caregiving duties, while also trying to maintain stability and normalcy for our children during an incredibly stressful time. But what struck me most during this crisis was how different our family's response was from the dysfunction I had experienced in my childhood. Instead of becoming defensive or turning on each other under pressure, we became more open and supportive. The children stepped up to help with household responsibilities without being asked, and they showed remarkable maturity in understanding that their father's illness was serious but not something they had caused or could control. David's parents, Maria and Carlos, moved in with us temporarily to provide additional support, and Marcus made frequent trips from Vermont to help with childcare and household management. Friends from work, school, and our neighborhood organized meal deliveries and offered practical assistance without being asked. The contrast with my childhood experience of family crisis was stark and healing. This is what family is supposed to look like during hard times, I told Dr. Winters during one of our sessions. People come together and support each other instead of looking for someone to blame or control. David's treatment was ultimately successful, and he achieved complete remission after nearly 2 years of medical intervention. His recovery was gradual but steady, and our family emerged from the crisis stronger and more appreciative of what we had built together. The experience of almost losing David made me even more committed to the principles of honesty and authenticity that had guided our relationship from the beginning. We had faced a genuine test of our family's resilience, and we had passed that test through mutual support and love rather than through manipulation or control. When Sarah Elena graduated from high school as valedictorian and was accepted to multiple Ivy League universities, I felt a pride that was completely different from what I had experienced when achieving my own academic successes. There was no anxiety about whether her achievements were appropriate or sustainable, no concern about whether she was getting above herself or developing unrealistic expectations. There was only pure joy in her accomplishments and excitement about the opportunities that lay ahead of her. "I want to study international relations and maybe go to law school like you did," Sarah Elena told us during the college decision process. "I want to work on human rights issues and help people who've been treated unfairly." Her career aspirations were clearly influenced by my own work and experiences, but they were also authentically her own, based on her interests and values rather than on external pressure or expectation. David and I supported her choice enthusiastically, offering advice and resources while making it clear that we would be proud of her regardless of what career path she ultimately chose. Marcus David, now 16, was developing his own interests in environmental science and sustainability. He was an excellent student, but also an accomplished athlete and musician, demonstrating the kind of well-rounded development that comes from being encouraged to explore multiple interests rather than being pressured to excel in predetermined areas. Both of our children had grown up understanding that achievement and success were their own rewards, not currencies for earning parental approval. They pursued excellence because they enjoyed learning and growth, not because they feared disappointment or rejection if they failed to meet external standards. The contrast with my own childhood was profound and healing. I had spent 18 years trying to earn love through performance, while my children had grown up secure in the knowledge that our love for them was unconditional and permanent. They could take risks, make mistakes, and explore different possibilities without worrying about losing their place in our family. As I approached my 50th birthday, I found myself reflecting on the long journey from the frightened, approval-seeking child I had been to the confident, boundaried adult I had become. The transformation had required years of therapy, the support of chosen family members, and the courage to consistently choose health over dysfunction, even when that meant accepting the loss of relationships I had hoped could be repaired. But the journey had also been worth every difficult step. I had built a life that was authentic and meaningful, surrounded by people who valued and supported me unconditionally. I had found work that allowed me to transform my own painful experiences into resources for helping other people navigate similar challenges. Most importantly, I had broken the cycle of dysfunction that had characterized my childhood, creating a family environment where love was freely given and emotional manipulation was simply not tolerated. The letter I had once thought I might write to Patricia and Robert was never actually written, because my life had become the answer to their betrayal. Every choice I had made to prioritize authenticity over performance, every boundary I had maintained to protect my well-being, every moment of genuine happiness I had claimed was a response to their attempts to control and diminish me. I had learned that the most powerful form of resistance to psychological abuse is not confrontation or revenge, but the simple act of building a better life. By refusing to remain small, by insisting on my right to pursue excellence, by choosing relationships that enhanced rather than diminished my sense of self-worth, I had ultimately defeated every limitation they had tried to impose on me. Sarah Elena left for college the following fall, beginning her own journey of intellectual and personal development in an environment where her capabilities would be celebrated rather than questioned. David and I felt the normal sadness that comes with launching a child into independence, but we also felt pride in knowing that we had prepared her well for the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead. Marcus David entered his senior year of high school with his own ambitious academic and extracurricular goals, already beginning to explore college options and career possibilities. Like his sister, he approached these decisions with confidence and excitement rather than anxiety, secure in the knowledge that his parents would support whatever choices aligned with his interests and values. Watching both of my children navigate their transitions into adulthood with such confidence and optimism was perhaps the greatest validation of the choices I had made about family relationships and parenting philosophy. They were becoming exactly the kind of people I had hoped they would be: independent, compassionate, intellectually curious, and emotionally healthy. The family I had built through choice and intention was everything the family I had been born into could have been if it had been guided by love rather than fear, by support rather than control, by celebration rather than limitation. The contrast was both painful and healing, highlighting what I had lost while also affirming what I had gained through the courage to demand better for myself and my children. Sometimes people ask me if I ever regret my decision to cut ties with Patricia and Robert, if I think forgiveness might have been a better path than boundary setting. The question reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of what forgiveness means and what it can accomplish in relationships that are fundamentally dysfunctional. I have forgiven Patricia and Robert in the sense that I no longer carry anger or bitterness about their choices. I understand that they were flawed people who made terrible decisions, possibly out of their own fears and limitations rather than out of deliberate malice. I feel compassion for the insecurities and disappointments that may have motivated their need to control and diminish me. But forgiveness doesn't require me to pretend that harmful relationships are healthy ones, or to sacrifice my own well-being to manage other people's emotions. It doesn't require me to expose my children to dysfunction or to model acceptance of treatment that falls below basic standards of respect and support. The boundaries I established weren't about punishment or revenge. They were about protection and healing. They were about creating space for authentic relationships to flourish and ensuring that my children would grow up understanding what healthy family dynamics actually look like. Today, at 52, I can say with confidence that I have built exactly the life I was meant to live. My work continues to evolve and expand, providing meaningful ways to contribute to social justice while also supporting my family financially. My marriage to David remains strong and loving, built on foundations of mutual respect and shared values that have withstood significant testing over the years. My relationship with Marcus continues to be one of the most important connections in my life, providing ongoing proof that family relationships can be sources of strength and joy when they're based on genuine care and support. His children and mine are growing up as cousins who know they belong to the same extended family, with all the security and connection that such relationships can provide. Sarah Elena is thriving in college, pursuing her interests with the kind of intellectual passion and social consciousness that make me proud to be her mother. Marcus David is preparing for his own college journey with similar confidence and excitement, already demonstrating the qualities of leadership and empathy that will serve him well throughout his life. The house we live in is filled with the kind of warmth and authenticity that I had always dreamed of as a child. Our dinner table conversations are about ideas and dreams rather than criticism and limitation. Our family celebrations are joyful rather than performative. Our conflicts, when they arise, are resolved through honest communication rather than manipulation or guilt. This is what healing looks like, not the absence of scars, but the transformation of pain into wisdom. Not the forgetting of past hurts, but the courage to create better relationships in the present. Not the restoration of broken family ties, but the building of new families based on choice, respect, and unconditional love. The betrayal that once threatened to destroy me ultimately freed me to become the person I was always meant to be: whole, worthy, and wonderfully, authentically myself. And in becoming that person, I created a legacy of love and authenticity that will continue through my children and their children, breaking forever the cycle of dysfunction that had characterized previous generations. If my story resonates with you, if you too have felt betrayed by those who claim to love you, remember that you are not alone. Remember that you have the power to choose relationships that celebrate rather than diminish you, that support rather than limit you, that encourage your growth rather than demand your gratitude. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say no to treatment that falls below basic standards of respect. Sometimes the healthiest choice is to walk away from relationships that require you to be less than you are capable of being. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give to the people who come after you is the example of someone who refused to accept anything less than authentic love. This is my letter to anyone who has ever felt like they had to choose between their own growth and their family's approval. Choose growth. Choose authenticity. Choose relationships that make you bigger rather than smaller. And trust that in doing so, you're not just healing yourself. You're creating possibilities for future generations to experience the kind of family love that truly deserves the name.